Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the bustling world of a medieval apothecary's shop, where the truth is, your senses might be overwhelmed by the pungent mix of dried herbs, unwashed bodies, and mysterious concoctions that could either heal or harm. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun barely peeks through the narrow, grimy window of your medieval apothecary's shop, casting a weak light that does little to illuminate the chaos within. Forget the sanitized, well-organized pharmacies of today. Here, you're stepping into a world where the scent of dried herbs mingles with the unmistakable tang of something that can only be described as medieval mystery. Your eyes scan the cramped shelves, and you're greeted by an overwhelming assortment of jars, vials, and bundles of dried plant material that look like they've been plucked from a botanist's fever dream. But don't be fooled by the romantic notion of a wise apothecary meticulously crafting potions with sage-like wisdom. Oh no, my friend. This place is more trial and error than Hogwarts. In the medieval world, apothecaries were the go-to for medical remedies, but they were also a bit like the Wild West of healthcare. The apothecary didn't just offer you a magical cure-all. Instead, they provide a concoction with a side of uncertainty. We're talking about a time when medical education wasn't standardized, and a lot of what passed for knowledge was more conjecture than science. That dried snake skin. Yep, you might find that here, and it's probably touted as a cure for something unpronounceable. Let's talk about the herbs, because oh boy, they were the stars of the show. Your garden variety medieval apothecary stocked over 200 different herbs, each claiming to remedy anything from headaches to heartache. Take rosemary, for example. Today, it's a lovely addition to your Sunday roast, but back then, it was thought to improve memory. People would weave it into their hair, hoping to become the next medieval Mensa member. And then there's mandrake, the root that looks disturbingly human and was believed to scream when dug up. It was used as a sedative, though it sometimes had the unfortunate side effect of, well, death. But enough about plants. Let's get to the real juicy stuff, animal parts. The medieval apothecary was a veritable Noah's Ark of bizarre ingredients. Want to cure your gout? Maybe try some powdered unicorn horn. Okay, so it wasn't really unicorn horn, but rather narwhal tusk or rhinoceros horn, but the belief was there, and that's what mattered. And if your stomach was feeling a bit off, a bit of dried toad could be just the thing to set you right. Because what's more comforting than knowing your treatment plan involves a former amphibian? The apothecary's shop was also a chemistry lab of sorts, filled with mysterious powders and potions that would make a modern pharmacist cringe. Take theriac, for instance, a concoction that supposedly contained over 60 ingredients, including opium and viper's flesh. It was basically the medieval equivalent of a wellness smoothie, promising to cure everything from snake bites to the plague. But if you thought a cure-all like theriac was pricey, you'd be right. It could cost a small fortune, equivalent to several months' wages for a peasant. And that brings us to the myth-busting portion of our tour, the apothecary as a medical genius. While they certainly knew more than the average peasant, apothecaries weren't exactly the medical McDreamies of their day. Many treatments were based on humoral theory, the idea that health depended on balancing bodily fluids, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Feeling a bit too sanguine? Let's bleed you. Too much black bile? Perhaps a nice purgative is in order. It was all about balance, albeit a balance that frequently left patients feeling worse than before. Now, you might wonder how people survived such dubious treatments. The simple answer, they often didn't. The typical life expectancy in medieval Europe was around 30 to 40 years. But let's not paint too bleak a picture. Despite the odds, some folks did manage to live into their 70s and beyond, though they were the exception, not the rule. So, as you stand in the apothecary's shop, inhaling a blend of scents that could double as a love potion or a curse, remember that while it's easy to romanticize the past, the reality was often far more complex and chaotic. The medieval apothecary's world was one of constant experimentation, where each remedy was a gamble with your health. It's a place where science and superstition walked hand in hand down the dimly lit aisles, and every jar had a story to tell. Whether that story was one of healing or harm depended on a mix of luck, timing, and maybe a dash of medieval magic. And speaking of stories, let's dive into the economic tale that's as fascinating as any medieval legend. Picture this. You've just strolled into our medieval apothecary's shop, ready to fork over a fistful of coins for a remedy that might, or might not, do the trick. In today's dollars, think of it like paying $1.50 for a mystery potion that claims to cure your headache and possibly your love life. And if you were a peasant, that was no small change. A remedy could easily set you back a week's wages, which, for the record, was roughly what you'd earn for laboring sunup to sundown in the fields. Why such a hefty price tag, you ask? Enter the almighty guild system, medieval Europe's answer to Amazon, and the FDA rolled into one. Guilds were like the gatekeepers of the trades, controlling who got to call themselves an apothecary, and more importantly, what they could charge. They were the original pay-to-play system. If you wanted to hang your shingle as an apothecary, you first had to pony up a fee to join the guild. And let's not forget the years of apprenticeship, where you'd work under a master apothecary to learn the ropes, or more likely, the snakeskin potions. These guilds didn't just regulate pricing and membership. They also safeguarded recipes like they were the medieval version of Coca-Cola's secret formula. They ensured that the concoctions remained exclusive, and hey, exclusivity costs. They even had quality control, though the standards might be a bit lax by today's metrics. If a customer complained, the guild might investigate, but more often than not, the onus was on the customer to prove the remedy was faulty. Good luck with that, in an era where clinical trials were as likely as unicorn sightings. The guild's influence extended beyond the shop's threshold, adding fuel to the fiery relationship between apothecaries and physicians. Physicians, the so-called learned men with their university degrees, often dismissed apothecaries as little more than glorified merchants. Meanwhile, apothecaries viewed physicians as pompous gatekeepers with a penchant for bleeding patients dry, sometimes literally. It was a classic turf war, with both sides vying for the public's trust and coin. And trust me, when it came to the medieval healthcare market, loyalty was as fickle as the weather. But wait, there's more. As hospitals began to emerge, the dynamics shifted once again. Hospitals were initially places of hospitality, primarily serving the poor and pilgrims. But as they started to take on a more medical role, apothecaries found themselves in yet another rivalry. Hospitals began to employ their own apothecaries, which meant our independent shop owner had to contend with institutional competition. Imagine being the local coffee shop owner when a Starbucks sets up across the street. Except here, the coffee might be made from dandelion root, and the baristas have a penchant for leeches. Let's not forget the historical feuds that were practically soap operas in their own right. Take the infamous spat between the apothecaries and the worshipful Society of Apothecaries in London. In 1617, King James granted the apothecaries their own charter, officially recognizing them as a professional body separate from the grocers. This was like getting a personal nod from the king himself. It was a victory for apothecaries, but it didn't end their squabbles with physicians or hospitals. The ink was barely dry before disputes erupted over who had the right to prescribe medicine, a battle that raged for centuries. And yet, despite the bickering and economic hurdles, the apothecary's shop remained a cornerstone of medieval life. Yes, the prices could be exorbitant, and yes, the guilds were stricter than a headmaster with a hangover, but people kept coming back. Why? Because in a world where health was a roll of the dice, a trip to the apothecary offered a glimmer of hope, however faint. The allure of a cure, the promise of relief, even if it came wrapped in mystery and superstition, was enough to draw customers in droves. So there you stand in the dim light of the shop, coins clinking in your palm, debating whether today's paycheck should be spent on food or fate. It might seem outrageous to us now, but remember, in the grand tapestry of history, the apothecary was both hero and hustler, a purveyor of remedies and dreams. And as we continue to unravel this tale, keep in mind that the lessons learned here resonate far beyond those shadowy shelves, echoing into the complexities of modern healthcare. Stay tuned, because the next part of our adventure promises even more intrigue as we delve deeper into the lives of those who dared to double as healers and merchants. As we dive deeper into the medieval whirlwind of potions and politics, it's time to talk about how a microscopic menace reshaped the medical landscape. Enter the Black Death, stage left. The bubonic plague wasn't just a pandemic. It was the medieval equivalent of flipping the entire healthcare board game over and watching the pieces scatter. Between 1347 and 1351, it wiped out an estimated 25 to 50 million people in Europe, roughly a third of the population. Imagine trying to run a business in such chaos, where your regulars might not make it back for their next dose of theriac because they've succumbed to the plague. For apothecaries, this was both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, demand for treatments skyrocketed. The plague turned your average apothecary into the medieval version of a 24/7 emergency room, albeit one with a lot more guesswork and a lot less hand sanitizer. But on the flip side, the sheer scale of death made it clear that their remedies were, more often than not, as effective as a chocolate teapot. Desperation drove innovation, however, and apothecaries scrambled to concoct new cures, often with a little less science and a little more sorcery. The social fabric of Europe was unraveling faster than you can say, plague doctor, and with it came a temporary loosening of the rigid class structures. Suddenly, the barriers that kept common folk from accessing medical knowledge started to crumble, and apothecaries found themselves in a position to cater to a broader clientele, even if it was just to offer the medieval placebo effect. Society was in upheaval, and with the Grim Reaper as a constant companion, people were willing to try anything, even if it meant shelling out some serious coin for a potion made of who knows what. Now, let's talk about the women in this medieval medical circus. Yes, the apothecary trade was predominantly male, but that didn't stop some tenacious women from crashing the party. In a world where women were often relegated to the domestic sphere, there were a few who donned their herbalist hats and got to work. Take, for example, Jacoba Felicie, a 14th century French woman who practiced medicine without a license. She was dragged to court for the audacity of healing people without the proper male-endorsed credentials. Her defense: her treatments were more effective than those of her male counterparts. Mic drop. These women were the unsung heroes of healthcare, often working under the radar or as assistants to male apothecaries. The church and state weren't exactly rolling out the red carpet for female practitioners, but necessity is the mother of invention, or in this case, the mother of medical mavericks. Women's roles in apothecaries often involved preparing herbs and concoctions, skills passed down through generations. It was a family affair, with mothers teaching daughters the secrets of the trade, all while sidestepping societal disapproval. So, why did some women manage to break through the medieval glass ceiling? Part of it was sheer practicality. When plagues and wars left communities short on healers, women stepped up to fill the void. Another factor was the relative autonomy of apothecaries compared to other medical professions. They weren't bound by the same strict educational and licensing requirements that kept women out of universities and formal medical training. Instead, they learned through apprenticeships and hands-on experience, proving that sometimes the best teacher is necessity, and maybe a pinch of defiance. But let's not sugarcoat it. These women faced significant hurdles. They had to navigate a world where superstition and sexism went hand in hand, often being accused of witchcraft if a remedy worked a little too well. It was a tightrope walk over a pit of misogynistic vipers, yet they persevered, driven by a combination of skill, opportunity, and a healthy dose of chutzpah. Their stories remind us that while history often celebrates the exploits of men, women were right there in the thick of it, mixing potions and breaking barriers. The Black Death also prompted a re-evaluation of existing medical practices. As the plague raged on, the limitations of humoral theory became painfully obvious. You couldn't exactly balance your humors when half the town was dropping like flies. This led some apothecaries to dabble in what we might generously call early scientific inquiry. Sure, they didn't have microscopes or penicillin, but the crisis sparked a curiosity that would eventually pave the way for more rigorous scientific methods. The plague was a catalyst for change, shaking medieval society to its core and forcing it to evolve. It challenged established norms, creating a window for innovation and a re-evaluation of who could be a healer. It wasn't just about the remedies on the shelves, but the people behind them, Those, like the cunning women apothecaries, who dared to defy expectations. The medieval apothecary shop was more than a business. It was a microcosm of a society in flux, where every tincture and tonic told a story of survival, resilience, and the relentless quest for knowledge in the face of overwhelming odds. Now, as we prepare to explore even more of this fascinating world, let's keep in mind that the history of apothecaries is a tapestry woven with threads of both triumph and tragedy. It's a tale of innovation born from desperation, where the line between magic and medicine was as blurred as a scribe's handwriting after a night at the tavern. The stories of those who dared to venture into the realm of healing are a testament to the human spirit's ability to adapt and persevere, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll unravel more of the mysteries and marvels of medieval medicine. And so, as the dust of medieval upheaval settles, at least for a moment, let's wander down the spice route, where the allure of far-off lands and the promise of exotic cures beckon like sirens from a trader's tale. You see, the medieval apothecary shop wasn't just a local haunt. It was a microcosm of global commerce, a testament to human curiosity and the lengths people would go to for the promise of healing. Picture this. The silk-like threads of trade routes stretched across continents, weaving together a tapestry that brought the likes of cinnamon from Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, cardamom from India, and of course the much-coveted black pepper from the Malabar coast. These aren't just spices, they're the medieval equivalent of gold dust. By the time they reached European shores, they traveled thousands of miles, crossing deserts, mountains, and seas, each step adding to their mystique and price tag. Let's talk numbers. In the 14th century, a pound of ginger could cost as much as a sheep. Pepper, that was the Rolls-Royce of spices, sometimes used as currency itself. A pound of this so-called black gold might set you back the equivalent of a skilled laborer's monthly wage. So when an apothecary stocked these exotic ingredients, it wasn't just about flavor. It was about prestige, a testament to the shop's connections and the apothecary's savvy. But how did these spices end up in the apothecary's arsenal? Well, aside from making medieval gruel slightly less grim, they were hailed for their medicinal properties. Cinnamon, for instance, was believed to cure coughs and improve digestion. Clove was touted as a remedy for toothache, and nutmeg, well, it was thought to ward off the plague, although in reality you were more likely to be swindled into buying a nutmeg amulet than actually curing anything. Now, before you romanticize the idea of these spices as miracle cures, let's sprinkle in some skepticism. The truth is, the efficacy of these expensive imports was often as dubious as a medieval map. Sure, some had genuine medicinal properties. Clove oil does have antiseptic qualities, but many were more placebo than panacea. Yet the allure was undeniable. In a world where hope was often as scarce as hygiene, the exotic promised salvation, or at least a shot at it. And why such a steep price? The journey itself was perilous, with traders facing everything from treacherous terrain to pirates who'd happily relieve them of their precious cargo. These spices passed through the hands of countless middlemen, each one taking a cut, inflating the price like a medieval stock market bubble. By the time a pinch of cinnamon landed on a European shelf, it was more valuable than a gold ring. But let's not forget the game of geopolitical chess happening behind the scenes. The spice trade wasn't just about commerce, it was about power. Control of the spice routes meant control of wealth, and nations were willing to go to war over these fragrant prizes. The Venetians, for instance, became fabulously wealthy by monopolizing the spice trade in the Mediterranean, their galleys gliding back and forth like floating treasure chests. In this high-stakes game, apothecaries were both players and pawns. Their shops became the final destination for these exotic goods, where they'd be sold to the highest bidder or the most desperate soul. And while some apothecaries genuinely believed in the curative powers of these spices, others were more than happy to profit from the mystique, knowing full well that a sprinkle of exoticism could turn a mundane remedy into a coveted elixir. Let's not forget the role of myths in this spice-fueled saga. Tales of spices being guarded by mythical creatures or growing in paradise-like gardens only added to their allure. The more fantastical the story, the higher the price. And who could resist the allure of a potion supposedly made from a fruit of Eden or guarded by a dragon? It was marketing genius, centuries before we had Madison Avenue. As you stand in the apothecary's shop, surrounded by the scents of far-off lands, remember that these spices were more than just ingredients. They were symbols of a world interconnected by trade, ambition, and an insatiable thirst for the unknown. They tell a story of human ingenuity and the lengths we'll go to for hope, healing, and a taste of the exotic. And as we continue to unravel the mysteries of medieval medicine, keep your senses sharp, because the next chapter promises even more intrigue as we delve deeper into the lives of those who dared to double as healers and merchants, navigating a world as complex and captivating as any tale of adventure. But let's leave the fragrant allure of spices behind and step back into the dim, cluttered apothecary shop. As the sun dips below the horizon and lanterns flicker to life, it's time to ponder the long-lasting impact of this medieval profession. Despite the chaos and questionable cures, these early pharmacists laid the groundwork for modern medicine, even if their methods were as dubious as a politician's promise. First off, let's talk about innovation. The medieval apothecary was essentially a mad scientist with a penchant for herbal remedies and snake oil salesmanship. Yet, in their relentless quest for cures, they stumbled upon some genuine breakthroughs. For instance, the use of willow bark to relieve pain was an ancient remedy that laid the foundation for aspirin. That's right, that little white pill in your medicine cabinet has its roots in a medieval apothecary's dusty shelf. You can thank them for turning bark into a billion-dollar industry. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. Many of their practices were based on superstition and trial and error rather than rigorous science. But in a world where the line between medicine and magic was blurrier than a drunk scribe's handwriting, apothecaries were pioneers. They were among the first to document their concoctions meticulously, creating early pharmacopoeias that listed ingredients, methods, and uses. These texts were the medieval equivalent of a recipe book, though the end result was more likely to cure your ills than impress at a dinner party. Economically, apothecaries played a crucial role. They were early entrepreneurs, balancing the art of healing with the art of commerce. They had to be savvy, navigating the labyrinth of guild regulations and competitive rivalries. Their shops were like the medieval Amazon, offering everything from medicinal herbs to exotic spices, all while maintaining a healthy profit margin. They understood the power of branding long before it was a buzzword, ensuring their remedies were both exclusive and tantalizingly mysterious. Politically, apothecaries were often caught in the crossfire of power dynamics. They navigated a world where alliances were as changeable as the weather, and staying in the good graces of the local nobility could mean the difference between prosperity and penury. The granting of charters, like that from King James I, to the worshipful society of apothecaries, wasn't just a nod of recognition. It was a strategic maneuver in the chess game of medieval politics, and let's not overlook the social impact. Apothecaries were the original community health centers, offering access to medical knowledge in an era when such information was as guarded as a dragon's hoard. They democratized medicine, providing remedies to anyone with a few coins to spare. In doing so, they helped to erode the rigid class structures that dominated medieval society, albeit in small, incremental ways. Now, onto the myths. The romantic image of the wise apothecary, a medieval Merlin with a mortar and pestle, is both appealing and misleading. Sure, they had their moments of brilliance, but they were also human, prone to the same follies and fads as the rest of us. The enduring myths about their infallibility are more a testament to our love of legends than historical reality. After all, who doesn't enjoy a good story about mysterious potions and magical cures? But the gritty reality was that many of their treatments were hit or miss, and the consequences of a miss could be deadly. Despite this, the legacy of apothecaries is one of resilience and adaptation. They were the bridge between ancient herbalism and modern pharmacology, a testament to humanity's relentless pursuit of knowledge, even when that knowledge was wrapped in the shroud of mystery and superstition. As you stand in the apothecary's shop for the last time, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on the walls, remember that these early pharmacists were more than just purveyors of potions. They were pioneers in a world teetering between the Dark Ages and the dawn of enlightenment. Their legacy is a reminder that progress is often messy, filled with false starts and dead ends, yet driven by a tenacious spirit that refuses to give up. So, as you close the door on this medieval world, take with you the stories of those who dared to mix potions and peddle hope. Their tale is a microcosm of human history, a blend of ingenuity, ambition, and a dash of audacity. And as you drift off to sleep, remember that the apothecary's legacy is all around us, in every pill, potion, and remedy that promises to make us whole. Sweet dreams, my friend, and may your own adventures be as rich and rewarding as those who walked the dimly lit aisles of the medieval apothecary's shop. The Hawaiian Islands in the late 18th century were like a reality TV show waiting to happen, complete with power struggles, cultural clashes, and a cast of characters that would make any soap opera jealous. Each island was a self-governing entity, ruled by its own alley or chief, and equipped with a distinct culture that made the archipelago a patchwork quilt of traditions and rivalries. Before the whole unification thing hit the scene, the Hawaiian Islands were a bit like Europe before the EU, everyone doing their own thing and occasionally bickering about it. Let's start with the political landscape, a veritable Game of Thrones in a tropical paradise. There were the main players, Hawaii, Maui, Oahu, and Kauai, with a few supporting cast members like Molokai and Lanai thrown in for good measure. Each island had its own hierarchy, with a high chief on top, followed by lesser chiefs, and then the commoners. The high chiefs, or ali nui, wielded absolute power, and their word was law. It was good to be the chief, as long as you didn't mind the occasional assassination attempt, coup, or, being overthrown by a rival looking to expand their real estate portfolio. Speaking of rivalries, let's talk about the economy, or as I like to call it, the barter system that could make or break an island's standing. The Hawaiian economy was based on a system of ahupua, which were land divisions that stretched from the mountaintop to the ocean. Picture it as an elongated slice of pizza, where everyone got a piece of the action, resources, that is. Each ahupua was a self-sufficient unit, providing everything from fish and taro to pigs and sweet potatoes. It was all about sustainability and sharing the wealth, provided you were on the right side of the alley. Now, let's not forget the societal structures that held all these islands together, or rather, kept them from falling apart. The kapu system, a complex set of laws and religious practices, governed every aspect of Hawaiian life. It dictated what you could eat, where you could fish, and even where you could walk. Break a kapu and the punishment was severe. Think a swift introduction to Peel, the goddess of volcanoes, if you were unlucky. This system maintained order, but it also ensured that the ali held onto their power with an iron grip. Enter King Kamehameha, the original Hawaiian disruptor who looked at this fragmented political scene and thought, I can work with this. Born sometime around 1758, during Halley's Comet's visit, talk about an entrance. Kamehameha had the ambition of a Silicon Valley startup founder and the strategic mind of a chess grandmaster. He was not just another chief. He was a visionary with a knack for military strategy and diplomacy. His rise to power was fueled by a mix of bold alliances, tactical warfare, and a touch of destiny that would put most hero myths to shame. But before Kamehameha could unify the islands, he had to navigate the turbulent waters of inter-island politics and the arrival of foreign influences. The late 1700 saw European and American explorers, traders, and missionaries begin to trickle into Hawaii, lured by the island's strategic location and bountiful resources. This influx brought new technologies, weapons, and diseases, an exotic mix that would change Hawaiian society forever. The introduction of firearms, for instance, was a game-changer that tipped the scales in favor of whoever could get their hands on them first. Kamehameha wasn't just a skilled warrior. He was also a shrewd politician who understood that knowledge and firepower were keys to success. He cultivated relationships with foreign traders, securing muskets and cannons that would prove decisive in his campaigns. In 1790, he demonstrated his military prowess at the Battle of Kepaniwai on the island of Maui. Despite being outnumbered, Kamehameha's forces, armed with guns and cannons, crushed the opposition, leading to his eventual control of the island. This wasn't just a random act of conquest. It was a calculated move in Kamehameha's grand plan to bring the islands under a single rule. He saw the potential for a united Hawaii, a vision that would mean peace, prosperity, and a stronger position against foreign powers. But let's not romanticize this too much. Unification wasn't just about goodwill and rainbows. It was about power, dominance, and ensuring that he, Kamehameha, would be the one sitting on the throne when the dust settled. As Kamehameha's power grew, so did his legend. He was a man of contradictions, embodying both the fierce warrior and the compassionate leader. Stories of his strength and courage spread, cementing his status as a larger-than-life figure. Yet beneath these tales was a determined leader who understood that true power came from a combination of military might and political savvy. Of course, Kamehameha wasn't operating in a vacuum. He had his rivals, and they were no pushovers. Chief Kahekili of Maui, for instance, was a formidable opponent who gave Kamehameha a run for his money, or should we say, his coconuts. These rivalries were not just about personal vendettas. They were about control of resources, trade routes, and ultimately the future of the islands. But let's not overlook the cultural tapestry that defined pre-unification Hawaii. Each island had its own language dialects, art forms, and religious practices, creating a rich mosaic of traditions. The hula, for instance, was more than just a dance. It was an expression of history and spirituality, a way to pass down stories and beliefs. The art of copper making, the creation of bark cloth, was another cultural cornerstone, showcasing the island's ingenuity and resourcefulness. Despite the looming shadow of unification, these cultural practices thrived, adapting and evolving as Kamehameha's influence spread. And while the Ali engaged in political maneuvering and military campaigns, the common people continued their daily lives, farming, fishing, and maintaining the social fabric that held their communities together. So, here we are, standing on the precipice of change, with the islands poised for a transformation that would reshape their destiny. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the winds of unification were beginning to blow. Kamehameha's ambitions were no longer just a whisper among the palm trees. They were a rallying cry for a new era in Hawaiian history. But that's a story for another day, as we dig deeper into how this ambitious chief turned his dream of a united Hawaii into a reality. Stay tuned, because things are about to get legendary. With the winds of change starting to blow across the Hawaiian Islands, Kamehameha was gearing up for a journey that was part epic saga, part chess match, and part high-stakes poker game. His goal, to become the undisputed ruler of the archipelago. But unlike the mythic tales that portray him as a demigod who simply willed the islands into submission, the real story of Kamehameha's rise is far more nuanced, and yes, a bit more brutal. First off, let's address the elephant in the luau. Kamehameha wasn't exactly a one-man show. He was more like the CEO of a startup, with a brain trust that included savvy advisors, skilled warriors, and yes, a few foreigners with some shiny new toys. Key among these was John Young, a British sailor who shipwrecked on the Big Island and decided to stick around. Young, along with Isaac Davis, another European who found himself in Hawaii by sheer happenstance, became Kamehameha's right-hand men. They were instrumental in introducing Western military technology, think cannons, muskets, and tactical know-how that tipped the scales in Kamehameha's favor. Now, let's not get too starry-eyed about these alliances. They were less about friendship and more about mutual benefit. Kamehameha understood the value of Western technology in his quest for unification. By integrating firearms into his military strategies, he was able to outmaneuver rivals who were still relying on traditional weaponry. It was a bit like showing up to a knife fight with a bazooka, game-changing, to say the least. Speaking of game-changers, let's talk about the Battle of Naiuanu in 1795. This was Kamehameha's defining moment, the crescendo in his symphony of conquest. The battle took place on the island of Oahu, where Kamehameha's forces faced off against those of Chief Kalaniʻipiu. It was a brutal affair, culminating in the famous scene where the defeated warriors were driven off the cliffs of the Naiuanu Pali. The imagery is haunting, the kind of stuff that fuels legends. But the reality was that this victory wasn't just about martial prowess. It was about strategic brilliance, backed by superior firepower and meticulous planning. Kamehameha's approach to warfare was both pragmatic and ruthless. He was a master of psychological warfare, using intimidation as much as actual combat to achieve his ends. His reputation alone was often enough to sway rival chiefs to his side, sparing their lives and gaining their allegiance in one fell swoop. It's a reminder that sometimes the most effective weapon is the one you never have to use. But let's not sugarcoat things. Kamehameha's path to power was littered with the bones of those who stood in his way. His campaigns were marked by bloodshed and brutality, and his methods weren't always what you'd call humane. Yet, in a world where power was the ultimate currency, Kamehameha played the game better than anyone else. Economically, Kamehameha was no slouch either. He was quick to recognize the island's position as a potential hub for Pacific trade routes. By controlling the archipelago, Kamehameha could tap into the lucrative sandalwood trade, which was highly sought after in China. This wasn't just about wealth. It was about securing a future for his kingdom amidst the looming presence of foreign powers. And let's be clear, the economic stakes were as high as the volcanic peaks of Mauna Kea. The sandalwood trade alone was worth a fortune, a precious resource that could be exchanged for more weapons, supplies, and influence. Now, for those who like their history with a side of romance, the stories of Kamehameha's legendary strength and courage are irresistible. But beneath the veneer of heroism was a leader who understood the complexities of power. His vision for a united Hawaii was as much about political pragmatism as it was about idealism. He knew that a single, cohesive kingdom would be better positioned to resist foreign encroachment and maintain its cultural identity in the face of Western influences. As Kamehameha's influence spread, so did his reputation. He became a symbol of strength and unity, a larger-than-life figure whose legacy would endure long after his time. Yet, it's crucial to remember that his success was not just the result of divine favor or legendary heroics. It was the product of calculated decisions, strategic alliances, and a keen understanding of both human nature and the geopolitical landscape of his time. So, as we leave Kamehameha on the cusp of uniting the Hawaiian Islands, let's take a moment to appreciate the complexities of his journey. He was a leader who navigated the turbulent waters of change with a steady hand, balancing tradition with innovation and ambition with realpolitik. But the story doesn't end here. There's more to explore in the rise of the Kingdom of Hawaii, and it's a tale that continues to resonate with lessons on leadership, power, and the enduring struggle for autonomy in a globalized world. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the legacy of Kamehameha and the challenges of maintaining a unified kingdom in a rapidly changing world. As Kamehameha stood on the brink of uniting the Hawaiian Islands, it was clear that the real challenge was just beginning. The transition from a collection of squabbling islands to a unified kingdom wasn't going to be the seamless cultural blend that romantic tales might suggest. Think less melting pot and more complex stew, simmering with distinct flavors, each demanding its moment to shine. To start, let's chat about the cultural fusion that emerged under Kamehameha's rule. Imagine blending the styles of Picasso, Van Gogh, and Banksy into one painting. That's the kind of cultural mashup we're talking about. Each island had its own unique customs, from the spiritual dances of hula to the practical art of kapa making. Kamehameha had to be both a diplomat and a visionary, figuring out how to preserve these traditions while forging a new identity for his kingdom. Now, let's debunk a popular myth, the idea that everyone just sang kumbaya and got along swimmingly. Far from it. Integrating these diverse customs was like trying to mix oil and water without a blender. Take the kapu system, for example. This intricate network of taboos and rituals governed daily life, dictating everything from food consumption to social interactions. Kamehameha wisely chose to maintain the kapu, recognizing its importance in maintaining order. He was smart enough to know that some traditions, like a good pair of flip-flops, should never be discarded. But Kamehameha was no cultural fossil. He implemented innovations that would shake up the status quo while still respecting tradition. One of his key moves was the establishment of a centralized government, which was revolutionary in its own right. Picture it as a medieval monarchy meets a tribal council, with Kamehameha at the helm. This new system brought together chiefs from different islands, requiring them to work together. It was a bit like herding cats, but with higher stakes. On the economic front, Kamehameha had his eyes firmly on the prize. Remember that sandalwood trade we mentioned? It wasn't just a side hustle. It was a cornerstone of his economic policy. By controlling this valuable resource, Kamehameha could trade with foreign powers, securing goods that were otherwise unattainable. The value of sandalwood skyrocketed with some estimates suggesting it was worth its weight in gold. In a world where muskets and cannonballs were the ultimate currency, this trade was Kamehameha's ticket to the big leagues. However, let's not get too starry-eyed about Hawaii's integration into the global economy. The introduction of foreign goods brought its own set of challenges, not least of which was the erosion of traditional crafts. As imported textiles became more common, the art of copper-making began to fade. It was a classic case of progress versus preservation, with Kamehameha walking a tightrope between the two. And then there's the legal system. Kamehameha's government wasn't just about keeping the peace. It was about establishing a coherent set of laws that could be enforced across the islands. The Great Mahel, enacted later by his successors, was a landmark land redistribution act that attempted to modernize land ownership. But let's be real. It also paved the way for foreigners to acquire Hawaiian land, with long-term consequences that rippled through history like a stone tossed into a pond. Politically, Kamehameha's rule was a masterclass in realpolitik. He was savvy enough to know that loyalty couldn't be bought with promises alone. By distributing land to his chiefs, he ensured their allegiance, a Hawaiian take on keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. This move not only solidified his power, but also laid the groundwork for a unified kingdom that could stand strong against external threats. Yet, Kamehameha's legacy isn't just about political savvy and economic foresight. His story is a reminder that leadership is often about balancing the old with the new, the romantic with the pragmatic. He was a ruler who understood that preserving Hawaii's unique cultural identity was as important as wielding power. In a world increasingly influenced by foreign interests, Kamehameha stood as a guardian of both tradition and innovation. So, as we delve deeper into the cultural fusion that defined the Kingdom of Hawaii, let's remember that unification was never a simple process. It was a complex dance of diplomacy, tradition, and modernization, with Kamehameha leading the charge. His ability to integrate diverse customs and establish a centralized government while navigating the choppy waters of economic change was nothing short of remarkable. And while the romanticized vision of a harmonious blend is alluring, the reality was more akin to a volcanic eruption, fiery, unpredictable, and transformative. As we leave Kamehameha contemplating his next steps in this ever-evolving saga, it's clear that the story of Hawaii's unification is far from over. There's more to explore, more myths to debunk, and more lessons to learn from this extraordinary chapter in history. So, stay tuned, because the Kingdom of Hawaii is just getting started, and the journey ahead is as fascinating as it is complex. Just as Kamehameha's kingdom began to find its sea legs, a new cast of characters drifted onto the Hawaiian stage. Missionaries, traders, and those ever-ambitious Europeans, each with their own agenda. If Hawaii's unification was the main act, these new arrivals were the plot twists that turned the story into a complex drama worthy of a binge-worthy series. First up, the missionaries. Picture them as well-meaning yet somewhat intrusive guests at a party, determined to rearrange the furniture to fit their tastes. Arriving in 1820, just a year after Kamehameha's death, they came armed not with muskets, but with Bibles and a mission to save souls. Their goal, to convert the Hawaiian people to Christianity, a task they approached with the zeal of a motivational speaker on a caffeine high. Within a few decades, they'd established schools, churches, and printing presses, and the island saw a significant shift in religious practices. By the mid-1800, Christianity had taken root, much to the chagrin of the traditional kapu system, which found itself increasingly at odds with these new beliefs. Now, let's talk about the traders. These guys were the high rollers of the high seas, drawn to Hawaii like moths to a flame, and what a lucrative flame it was. The sandalwood trade was the initial lure, but soon it was sugar that became the sweet spot. By the 1830, sugar plantations were springing up faster than you could say sweet tooth, and Hawaii became a key player in the global sugar market. But the influx of foreign capital and labor didn't come without strings attached. As sugar's economic importance soared, so did foreign influence, with American businessmen beginning to wield significant power. It was like handing over the keys to the kingdom, one sugarcane stalk at a time. And then there were the Europeans. The Europeans, masters of the divide and conquer playbook. They arrived with their grandiose plans and maps, ready to carve up the Pacific like a Sunday roast. The British, the French, and the Russians each had their eyes on Hawaii, seeing it as a strategic gem in their colonial crowns. In 1843, the British even managed a brief takeover, though it lasted only 5 months before the Hawaiian king, Kamehameha III, managed to regain control. The king's motto, Ua Mauki Io Kar Aina I Pono, the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness, became a rallying cry for sovereignty, but the threat of annexation loomed like a dark cloud. Speaking of Kamehameha III, let's give him some credit. Leading the kingdom from 1825 to 1854, he was a master at playing the diplomatic chess game, balancing foreign interests while trying to safeguard Hawaii's independence. It was under his reign that the Hawaiian kingdom took significant strides toward modernization. He established a constitutional monarchy in 1840, a move as bold as it was necessary. This new system was designed to streamline governance, but it also served as a protective measure against foreign encroachment. Think of it as a legal firewall in a world where territorial ambitions were the latest fad. But let's not pretend that everything was sunshine and rainbows. The introduction of Western law and education brought profound changes to Hawaiian society. Literacy rates soared from practically non-existent to among the highest in the world by the 1850. But the cultural cost was steep. Traditional Hawaiian practices and language began to erode as Western education took precedence. Yet, for all the talk of progress, the specter of colonialism was never far off. Economically, the kingdom was on a roller coaster ride. The sugar industry was a double-edged sword, bringing wealth but also dependency. By the mid-19th century, sugar plantations were the economic backbone of Hawaii, but they were largely controlled by foreigners. This shift in economic power foreshadowed the political changes that would eventually lead to Hawaii's annexation by the United States in 1898. It was a classic case of economic leverage turning into political control, a lesson in how money, not just might, makes the world go round. Of course, with great economic opportunity came great social upheaval. The influx of laborers from China, Japan, Portugal, and other countries transformed Hawaii into a multicultural mosaic, a far cry from its homogeneous past. These immigrant communities enriched Hawaiian culture, but they also introduced new social dynamics and tensions. The labor force was a melting pot of ethnicities, each bringing their own traditions, languages, and aspirations. It was a vibrant, if sometimes volatile, mix that would ultimately shape Hawaii's identity. Yet, amidst all this change, the royal family sought to maintain a semblance of control. They navigated the choppy waters of diplomacy, often seeking alliances with foreign powers to counterbalance the threats to their sovereignty. It was a delicate balancing act, akin to walking a tightrope without a safety net. One misstep, and the kingdom could fall into the hands of those who saw it as nothing more than a strategic asset. As Hawaii's rulers grappled with these external pressures, the internal dynamics were equally challenging. The introduction of Western-style governance necessitated a shift in how power was distributed. The Ali, once the undisputed lords of the land, found themselves adapting to a new political reality. This transition wasn't always smooth, and the tensions between traditional and modern governance were palpable. It was a bit like upgrading from a flip phone to a smartphone, exciting but fraught with growing pains. Meanwhile, the global trade landscape was evolving at a breakneck pace. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and Hawaii found itself at the crossroads of East and West. Its location made it a crucial stopover for ships traversing the Pacific, and this newfound significance wasn't lost on the kingdom's leaders. They understood that Hawaii's future depended on its ability to adapt to this rapidly changing world, even as they sought to preserve their cultural heritage. And so, as we stand on the brink of the next chapter, it's clear that Hawaii's journey was far from a linear narrative. It was a saga of resilience and reinvention, of embracing new opportunities while grappling with the relentless march of change. The challenges were immense, but so too were the possibilities, and the story of the Kingdom of Hawaii was only just beginning to unfold. Stay tuned, because this tale of ambition, adaptation, and survival is one you won't want to miss. As the sun set on the 19th century, Hawaii's story was far from a tranquil postcard scene. Instead, it was a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of cultural resilience, economic ambition, and political maneuvering. The legacy of the Kingdom of Hawaii is a testament to the dynamism of a people who navigated the tumultuous seas of change with both grace and grit. Let's pull back the curtain and take a closer look at the Unification's lasting impact on modern Hawaiian culture and society. You see, Kamehameha's dream of a united Hawaii wasn't just a footnote in the annals of history. It was a seismic shift that rippled through time, leaving its mark on everything from language to land ownership. Unification under Kamehameha wasn't merely about drawing new lines on a map. It was about forging a cohesive identity amidst a backdrop of diversity. The Hawaiian language, or Alilo Hawaii, became a unifying force, serving as the linguistic glue that held the islands together. It's a legacy that endures, with efforts to revive and preserve the language continuing to this day. But let's not sugarcoat the struggle. The rise of the Kingdom of Hawaii came at a cost, with traditional practices often taking a backseat to modernization. Land, for instance, became a hot commodity. The Great Mahel of 1848 was a watershed moment in Hawaiian history, redistributing land under a new system that attempted, albeit imperfectly, to balance the needs of the Hawaiian people with the interests of foreign powers. While it aimed to protect native land ownership, the reality was that it opened the floodgates for foreign acquisition. By the late 19th century, native Hawaiians owned less than 1% of the land, a sobering reminder of the unintended consequences of well-intentioned policies. The economic landscape, too, was a roller coaster of sugar highs and political lows. The sugar industry became the kingdom's economic lifeline, with plantations sprawling across the islands like a sweet-smelling blanket. By the 1880, sugar exports accounted for a whopping 90% of Hawaii's economy. But this golden era came with strings attached, as foreign investors tightened their grip on the industry, leading to a power imbalance that would ultimately contribute to Hawaii's annexation by the United States in 1898. Politically, the Unification under Kamehameha set the stage for a centralized monarchy that endured until the late 1800. The kingdom's rulers, from the astute Kamehameha Roman III to the beloved Queen Liliuokalani, navigated a world of shifting alliances and foreign pressures. Their reigns were marked by efforts to modernize and protect the kingdom, yet they faced relentless challenges from external forces eager to stake their claim in the Pacific. Now, about those romantic tales of noble kings and queens, let's not get carried away with the fairy tale narrative. While these stories captivate the imagination, the reality was often a complex dance of diplomacy and survival. The Hawaiian monarchy was as much about realpolitik as it was about pageantry. Kamehameha's successors, for instance, were strategic thinkers who understood the precarious position of their kingdom. They were acutely aware that maintaining sovereignty required deft navigation through the choppy waters of international relations. Culturally, the legacy of the Kingdom of Hawaii is a rich tapestry of resilience and adaptation. The hula, once suppressed by missionaries, experienced a renaissance in the late 19th century, reclaiming its place as a vibrant expression of Hawaiian identity. The art of kapa making, though challenged by the influx of foreign textiles, found new life through cultural preservation efforts. These traditions, along with the Hawaiian language, have become cherished symbols of a resilient culture that refuses to be erased. In the grand scheme of things, Hawaii's journey through the 19th century is a poignant reminder that history is rarely a linear narrative. It's a mosaic of triumphs and struggles, where the past continually informs the present. The unification of the Hawaiian Islands under Kamehameha was a bold vision that reshaped the archipelago's destiny. Yet, it was also a prelude to a more complex saga of cultural preservation and political resistance, a story that continues to resonate in the hearts of the Hawaiian people. So, as we conclude this deep dive into the rise of the Kingdom of Hawaii, let's remember that history is more than a collection of dates and events. It's a living narrative, rich with lessons on leadership, resilience, and the enduring quest for sovereignty. The legacy of Hawaii's unification is a testament to the spirit of a people who, despite the odds, have maintained their cultural identity and fought to protect their homeland. It's a story that reminds us that the past is never truly past. It's a part of who we are, shaping our journey into the future. In the end, the Kingdom of Hawaii stands as a symbol of resilience in a world of constant change. Its legacy is a call to remember the lessons of the past as we navigate the complexities of the present. So, the next time you find yourself gazing at the breathtaking Hawaiian sunset, take a moment to reflect on the rich tapestry of history that has brought us here. After all, history is not just a story of what was, but a guide to what can be. And with that, mahalo for joining me on this journey through the annals of Hawaiian history, where the legends are as vivid as the reality, and the lessons are as enduring as the islands themselves. The young Jane Austen, contrary to the sepia-toned myth of a demure damsel daydreaming in a bucolic paradise, was more like a sharp-witted satirist in training. Born on December 16, 1775, in the quaint village of Steventon, Hampshire, she was the seventh of 8 children, which practically made her a veteran in the art of family dynamics. Forget the image of the quiet country girl. Jane wasn't just sitting idly by while sheep frolicked in the fields. Her family was more like a lively theatre troupe than a pastoral household. Her father, George Austen, was a clergyman with a keen mind, and her mother, Cassandra Lee, was known for her wit and storytelling prowess. With a family like that, how could Jane not develop a sharp tongue and an even sharper pen? Let's talk economic realities. The Austens weren't exactly rolling in dough. George Austen earned around £600 a year, which was decent but not extravagant. To put it in perspective, that was the kind of income that could afford you a comfortable life, provided you didn't go on extravagant shopping sprees or develop a sudden fondness for expensive cheeses. Yet, the family managed to maintain an air of respectability, largely thanks to George's side hustle as a farmer and his ability to stretch a shilling further than a piece of elastic. Books were a luxury at the time, but for the Austens, they were as essential as bread and butter. George's library was the family's crown jewel, a treasure trove of literature that was more valuable than any gold-filled chest. It was here that Jane discovered the currency of imagination. The library contained over 500 volumes, ranging from classics to contemporary works, and Jane devoured them like a literary buffet. Her early writings, which she began crafting as a teenager, were undoubtedly shaped by these literary feasts. Her parodies, which marked the sentimental novels of the day, reveal a young writer who was razor-sharp and ready to skewer any romantic nonsense that came her way. Now, let's debunk another myth. Jane Austen wasn't riding in a vacuum. She was an active member of a literary network, and her family played a crucial role. Her older brother James was an aspiring writer, and the family often read aloud to each other, critiquing and refining their works. This collaborative environment was the perfect incubator for Jane's burgeoning talent. By the age of 14, she had written Love and Friendship, a satirical piece that poked fun at the excessive emotions and improbable plots of popular novels. If anyone thought Jane was just a country girl with a quill, they were in for a surprise. Financial pressures were a constant companion for the Austens, and the publishing world wasn't exactly rolling out a red carpet for aspiring novelists. In the early 19th century, getting a book published was about as easy as finding a unicorn in your backyard. The publishing industry was a tough nut to crack, dominated by a few major players who wielded power like gatekeepers of literary fame. Publishing a novel typically cost between £30 to £50, a hefty sum when you consider George Austen's annual income. So, when Jane's father offered to cover the cost of publishing her novel, First Impressions, an early version of Pride and Prejudice, in 1797, it was a gamble, a bet on Jane's talent that didn't pay off initially, as the manuscript was rejected. But Jane was nothing if not persistent. She continued to write, revising and refining her works with the precision of a watchmaker. Her breakthrough came in 1811 with the publication of Sense and Sensibility. Published anonymously, as was common for women writers of the time, it was simply attributed to a lady. The novel was published on a commission basis, meaning the publisher took on the financial risk, and Jane earned a modest profit of £140. Not exactly a windfall, but enough to keep her pen moving and her spirits buoyed. The world Jane inhabited was one of social upheaval and economic uncertainty, with the Napoleonic Wars casting a long shadow. Society was rife with strict class divisions and limited opportunities for women. In this context, Jane Austen's novels were revolutionary in their own quiet way. They offered a mirror to society, reflecting its absurdities and highlighting the often overlooked lives of women. Her characters lived in a world where marriage was often more about financial security than romance, a reality Jane knew all too well. So, as we peel back the layers of the Austen myth, we find a young woman who was anything but a passive observer. Jane Austen was a keen critic of her world, armed with a biting wit and a deep understanding of human nature. Her early life was a crucible of challenges and inspirations, shaping a writer who would go on to leave an indelible mark on literature and society. As we explore further, we'll see how this quiet country girl became one of the most enduring voices in English literature, proving that wit and wisdom never go out of style. And so we find ourselves in 1811, a pivotal year not just for Jane, but for the literary world she was poised to upend. Sense and Sensibility hit the shelves, and like any good Regency-era debutante, it was dressed to impress, anonymously attributed to a lady. Because, nothing screams modesty and mystery quite like that. Let's dive into the juicy details of this literary debut. Publishing back then was a bit like playing a high-stakes game of whist, where the risks were real and the stakes were high, especially for a woman. For context, the average annual income for a middle-class family was about £200, so when Jane received £140 from the first run of her novel, it was more than just pocket change. But don't go imagining Jane rolling in riches Scrooge McDuck style. She was still far from financial independence, and the sum was more a nod to her talent than a ticket to luxury. The decision to publish anonymously wasn't just a coy game of peekaboo with the public. It was a strategic move. For women in Jane's time, stepping into the public arena of authorship was as daring as a modern-day leap into the world of tech startups. The literary scene was a boys' club, and women writers often faced critical scrutiny that had less to do with the quality of their work and more with their gender. Now, let's pause for a reality check. The reception of Sense and Sensibility was lukewarm at first. The novel didn't explode onto the scene with fireworks and fanfare. Instead, it was more like a slow-burning candle, illuminating the corners of society that people preferred to keep in the shadows. Critics of the day were a mixed bag. Some praised Austen's realism and subtlety, while others, less enamored, missed the point entirely. But that's to be expected when you're holding up a mirror to society and folks don't quite like what they see. In Sense and Sensibility, Austen crafted a narrative that was as much about survival as it was about love. The Dashwood sisters, Elinor and Marion, navigate a world where financial security is a woman's lifeline, and marriage is often more a business deal than a romantic endeavor. Behind the genteel drawing-room chatter and the rustle of silk skirts, Austen's biting wit was hard at work. She skewered the conventions of her time with the precision of a master fencer, revealing the absurdities and injustices that women faced daily. Here's a kicker for those of you who think Jane was all about the romance. Her novels were often devoid of the sweeping declarations of love that characterized her contemporaries' work. Instead, she focused on the economic realities that governed relationships, a truth as relevant now as it was then. Austen's characters knew that love was nice, but a good dowry was better. The novel's success lay in its ability to depict these realities without resorting to melodrama or sermonizing. Instead, she used humor and irony to make her points, a tactic that endeared her to readers who enjoyed a good chuckle at the expense of society's absurdities. As for the readers, they were divided. Some found the novel's realism refreshing, while others were baffled by its lack of melodrama. The tale of two sisters, practical Elinor and romantic Marion, resonated with those who understood the delicate dance between sense and sensibility in their own lives. It was a subtle rebellion against the norms that dictated a woman's worth was tied to her ability to marry well. Let's not forget the larger economic picture. The Napoleonic Wars were raging, and England was a country in the throes of change. The economy was as unpredictable as a spring shower, and class divisions were stark. In this uncertain world, Austen's novels offered more than escapism. They were a form of social commentary, a way to explore the complexities of human relationships against a backdrop of economic and social upheaval. Publishing Sense and Sensibility was a gamble, not unlike betting your last guinea on the horses. But while the initial reception was modest, the novel's success set the stage for Austen's future works. It proved that there was a market for stories that delved into the intricacies of human nature with humor and honesty. Austen didn't just write about society. She dissected it with a scalpel disguised as a quill, laying bare its hypocrisies and absurdities with a wit that was as sharp as it was subtle. In the end, Sense and Sensibility was more than just a novel. It was a statement. It was a declaration that a woman could observe, critique, and contribute to the literary world in ways that were both profound and entertaining. Austen's debut set the tone for her subsequent works, establishing her as a keen observer of human nature and a master of social satire. As we continue to unravel the layers of her life and work, it becomes clear that Jane Austen was anything but a passive participant in her world. She was a trailblazer, armed with a pen and a keen sense of the absurd, ready to take on the literary establishment one novel at a time. Speaking of trailblazers, let's dive into the world that Jane Austen inhabited, a world where the social and political climate of Regency England was as turbulent as a Regency-era ball after too much punch. You see, the early 19th century wasn't just about empire waistlines and dashing officers in red coats. It was a time of massive social upheaval, where the Napoleonic Wars were draining the national purse, and the Industrial Revolution was reshaping the landscape faster than you could say steam engine. And here's the kicker. All this chaos was happening while King George Roman III was losing his marbles, leaving the country in the hands of his son, the Prince Regent, who was more into lavish parties than public service. Now, why does this matter for our dear Jane? Because the society she observed with such a keen eye was in the midst of a tectonic shift. The old order of landed gentry was being challenged by a new class of wealthy industrialists and merchants. Money was becoming as important as noble blood, and the lines of class were blurring like a watercolor left out in the rain. All this played out in drawing rooms and parlors, where Austen's characters navigated the treacherous waters of courtship and marriage. Take Pride and Prejudice, for example. It's not just a love story between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, though I know that's the part we all swoon over. It's a vivid portrayal of the class dynamics and gender politics of Austen's time. Elizabeth, with her wit sharper than a tailor's needle, is a woman caught in the crossfire between tradition and change. She's got 5 sisters, a mother who sees matrimony as a survival strategy, and a father who's more interested in his books than in his daughter's dowries. The Bennet's estate, Longbourn, is entailed away to Mr. Collins. Yes, that Mr. Collins, because heaven forbid women should inherit property. It's a setup that screams systemic injustice, and Austen wasn't about to let it pass without a sly nod and a wink. And then there's Darcy. Ah, Mr. Darcy, the epitome of the brooding hero with a heart of gold. But let's not get too carried away with the romance. Darcy's initial arrogance and prejudice against Elizabeth's lower social standing reflect the rigid class hierarchies of the day. His £10,000 a year, roughly equivalent to a cool million in today's money, sets him apart in a society obsessed with wealth and status. Yet, beneath his haughty exterior, Darcy embodies the potential for change, challenging the notion that class dictates character. Austen's novels were set against a backdrop of drawing-room chatter and genteel society, but they were anything but insular. Her stories mirrored the broader societal changes and tensions of her era, tackling issues of class, gender, and economic power with a deft touch. For instance, the marriage market Austen so often critiqued was a direct reflection of the limited opportunities available to women. Marrying well was not just a romantic ideal, but a financial necessity. The alternative, spinsterhood and financial dependence on male relatives, not exactly the stuff of fairy tales. Speaking of financial realities, let's not forget that Austen herself was no stranger to economic constraints. Her novels often depict the precarious financial situations faced by women, a nod to her own experiences. The Austens were members of the gentry, but they weren't exactly swimming in gold coins. Jane's novels were penned in a society where a woman's fortune, or lack thereof, could determine her entire future. And let's talk about the myth of the idyllic countryside. Sure, it sounds charming, but but the reality was far more complex. The Industrial Revolution was transforming the rural landscape, and with it, the lives of those who lived there. The enclosure movement, which privatized common lands, was forcing small farmers off their land, leading to increased poverty and social unrest. This tension between the pastoral ideal and the harsh economic realities was something Austen captured with subtlety and skill. In Pride and Prejudice, the contrast between the bustling town of Meryton and the grand estates of Pemberley and Rosings reflects the widening gap between the traditional landowners and the emerging middle class. The novel's settings are more than just backdrops. They're characters in their own right, representing the changing social landscape of Regency England. So, while Austen's novels may seem like genteel tales of love and manners, they're actually sharp commentaries on the social and political climate of her time. Austen was a master of using the personal to reflect the political, weaving stories that were as much about individual relationships as they were about societal change. Her works reveal the absurdities and injustices of her society, all while keeping us hooked with her wit and keen observations. In the end, Austen's enduring appeal lies in her ability to capture the universal truths of human nature. Her characters, with their flaws and follies, are as relatable today as they were in the early 19th century. Her novels remind us that while the world may change, the complexities of love, ambition, and social status remain. And as we continue to explore the world of Jane Austen, we'll see how her incisive social commentary and timeless storytelling continue to resonate, proving that wit and wisdom never go out of style. So, grab your reticule and your best bonnet, because we're not done with Austen just yet. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into her world, where the drawing room is a microcosm of society, and every glance and gesture tells a story. As we lace up our dancing shoes to waltz into the next chapter of the Austen saga, let's tackle the mythologization of Jane Austen, a literary icon whose life story has been polished and packaged like a Regency-era romance. But as with any good tale, there's more beneath the surface. First off, Jane's image today is more myth than reality. Picture the quintessential English spinster, forever penning novels in a sun-dappled parlor. Romantic, right, but the truth, as always, is more complex. Austen, in reality, battled constant health issues, potentially Addison's disease, which wasn't just a case of the vapors, but a serious adrenal disorder. Her health decline culminated in her untimely death at age 41 in 1817. Her passing left her literary legacy in the hands of her family, who were more than eager to shape her narrative. Enter Henry Austen, Jane's beloved brother, and the self-appointed PR manager of her posthumous fame. Henry was instrumental in publishing Northanger Abbey and Persuasion after her death, and he penned a biographical notice that painted Jane as a genteel, pious woman. It was a portrayal that suited the Victorian sensibilities of the time, but one that didn't quite capture the sharp-tongued realist we meet in her novels. Henry had his reasons. In an era when women writers were often dismissed or trivialized, presenting Jane as a virtuous lady of letters was a strategic move to ensure her work was taken seriously. But in doing so, he inadvertently sanded off the edges of her personality, leaving behind a sanitized version of Jane that would persist for generations. It's like airbrushing history to fit the frame, nice to look at, but not entirely accurate. Now, let's talk economics because, as much as we love to romanticize the past, money mattered then as much as it does now. Jane's financial independence, or the lack thereof, was a significant reality of her life. Despite the modest success of her novels, she never achieved financial security. Her total earnings from her writing amounted to about £700, a sum that, while not insignificant, was hardly enough to lift her from reliance on her family. In Regency, England, a single woman without substantial means faced limited options. Marry well, live as a dependent relative, or gasp, work. Jane chose the path less traveled, dedicating herself to her craft despite the constraints. Her decision to remain unmarried wasn't just a romantic stand, but a practical choice in a society that valued women primarily for their marital status. In her novels, she critiqued this reality with a deft hand, crafting heroines who navigated the narrow path between love and financial necessity. Her family, aware of the precariousness of women's financial situations, supported her work. Jane's father, George, had initially attempted to find a publisher for her novel First Impressions, and her brothers Charles and Francis, both naval officers, shared her manuscripts and championed her writing. It was a family affair, with their support providing the scaffolding for her career. Let's debunk another myth, the notion that Jane Austen was an overnight success. The truth is, she toiled in relative obscurity during her lifetime. While her novels were well received, they didn't achieve the blockbuster status we associate with them today. Her fame grew gradually, bolstered by subsequent generations who discovered the timeless wit and insight of her work. Her novels became a mirror, reflecting the enduring complexities of human relationships. Fast forward to the 1870s, and Austen's reputation received a significant boost from literary heavyweights like George Eliot and Henry James, who admired her keen observation of society. By the turn of the century, she was firmly entrenched in the literary canon, her works studied and celebrated for their craftsmanship and commentary. It was the beginning of the Austen mania that continues to this day. And speaking of Austen mania, let's not forget the countless adaptations that have kept her stories alive and relevant. From the iconic 1995 BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. Yes, the one with Colin Firth's wet shirt moment, to more modern takes like Clueless, which reimagined Emma in a Beverly Hills high school, Austen's influence permeates popular culture. Her ability to capture the universal truths of love, ambition, and social status makes her stories ripe for reinterpretation. But why does Jane Austen endure? Perhaps it's because her novels, while firmly rooted in the Regency era, speak to the timeless human experience. Her characters grapple with the same desires, fears, and follies that we do today. They navigate the complexities of love and social expectation, offering a window into the human condition that resonates across centuries. In the end, Jane Austen's story is one of resilience and wit in the face of societal constraints. She crafted narratives that critique the world around her, all while maintaining a sharp sense of humor and a keen eye for human nature. Her life, though marked by challenges, was a testament to the power of storytelling, a legacy that continues to captivate and inspire. As we delve deeper into her lasting impact, we'll explore how Austen's work remains a touchstone for both literary scholars and hopeless romantics alike. Her novels may have been penned over 2 centuries ago, but their themes are as relevant now as they were then, proving that wit and wisdom truly stand the test of time. So, stay tuned as we unravel more of the Austen enigma, where every line penned carries the weight of history and the promise of insight. So, as we unravel more of the Austen enigma, where every line penned carries the weight of history and the promise of insight, let's dive into the big question. Why does Jane Austen's legacy endure like a Regency-era fashion trend that refuses to go out of style? Simply put, it's because her work operates on multiple levels, like a literary Swiss Army knife, always ready with just the tool you need to dissect the human condition. First off, let's tackle the feminist angle. Cue the rallying cries and the waving of I 3 Lizzie Bennet banners. In an era where women were often seen as quaint accessories to their husbands, Austen dared to give her female characters agency, intelligence, and a healthy dose of sass. Take Elizabeth Bennet, for instance. She's not just Mr. Darcy's love interest. She's a proto-feminist icon who challenges social norms with the tenacity of a Regency-era trailblazer. Lizzie's got wit so sharp it could cut through the societal fog of her day, and she uses it to navigate a world that often underestimates her. For Austen, love and marriage were more than plot devices. They were battlegrounds where women could assert their independence and intellect. But Austen's feminism wasn't the banner-waving variety. It was subtler, woven into the very fabric of her narratives. Her heroines, while navigating the marriage market like social ninjas, were also critiquing the system from within. Austen's stories highlight the absurdity of a world where a woman's worth is measured by her marriage prospects. Her characters are fully aware of the economic realities they face, and their stories resonate because they reflect the ongoing struggle for gender equality, an issue as relevant today as it was then. Now, let's talk about those modern adaptations that have kept the Austen flame burning brighter than a Regency ballroom chandelier. From Bollywood's Bride and Prejudice to the zombie-infested Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, Austen's works have been reimagined in almost every conceivable form. And why not? Her keen insights into human nature and societal norms provide fertile ground for reinterpretation. Each adaptation, whether it's a faithful period piece or a loose reinterpretation, highlights the universality of her themes. The settings may change, but the core truths remain. Love, ambition, and the quest for social status are timeless. Even the seemingly escapist adaptations serve a deeper purpose. They highlight the absurdities and contradictions of both Austen's time and our own. The enduring appeal of her stories lies in their ability to transcend their Regency setting and speak to the complexities of modern life. In Clueless, for example, the high school antics of Cher Horowitz are a perfect mirror for Emma Woodhouse's meddling matchmaking, proving that the more things change, the more they stay, well, clueless. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of it all. Behind the ruffled gowns and drawing-room drama lies the sharp edge of Austen's social critique. She was a master at using humor to expose the ridiculousness of her society's conventions. Her novels are like Trojan horses, smuggling biting commentary into the genteel world of love stories. Austen didn't just write about marriage and manners. She was dismantling the very institutions that constrained her and her peers. And that brings us to the myth of Jane Austen, the genteel spinster scribbling away in a corner. The reality was far less picturesque. Austen was a savvy writer who knew her market and her audience. She was acutely aware of the economic necessity of her writing, and her novels reflect the precarious financial situations faced by women of her class. Her sharp observations on wealth, marriage, and class were not just literary devices, they were reflections of her lived experience. Let's not forget the economics of Austen's world, where a woman's future could pivot on the size of her dowry or the entailment of an estate. These were not just plot points, they were the harsh realities of Regency England. For Austen, writing was both an artistic pursuit and a financial necessity. Her modest earnings from her novels were a testament to her talent, but also a reminder of the limited financial independence available to women of her time. In the grand tapestry of literary history, Jane Austen's legacy is like an intricate embroidery, each thread representing her keen insights into human nature and societal norms. Her novels continue to resonate because they capture the complexities of the human experience with unparalleled wit and wisdom. Austen didn't just write about the world she lived in. She held up a mirror to it, revealing its hypocrisies and absurdities with a deft touch that remains unmatched. So, as we close the book on our journey through Austen's world, let's remember her not just as a literary icon, but as a trailblazer who used her pen to challenge the status quo. Her stories, with their sharp observations and timeless themes, continue to captivate and inspire, proving that wit and wisdom are indeed the most enduring legacies of all. And as long as there are readers who appreciate a good tale of love, ambition, and social folly, Jane Austen's legacy will remain as vibrant as ever. The year 1347 wasn't just another page in a dusty medieval calendar. It was the grim herald of the Black Death's debut in Europe. Picture bustling medieval ports, Genoa, Venice, and Messina, teeming with merchants, sailors, and unknowingly some very unwelcome stowaways. Fleas, hitching a ride on black rats, were about to unleash chaos worthy of a horror film, minus the popcorn. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. The Black Death didn't politely knock on Europe's door with a bouquet of flowers. It barged in, wielding symptoms that read like a medieval list of top 10 things you really don't want to experience. We're talking about buboes the size of golf balls, fever that could rival a furnace, and an odor that even the most forgiving medieval noses couldn't ignore. And if you thought it couldn't get worse, it often led to a death so rapid that it left little time for last words, let alone a goodbye. The plague moved at a pace that would make even modern-day internet speeds blush. Within just a few years, it had spread across Europe like spilled ink on parchment, leaving cities like Florence and London gasping for breath. By 1351, estimates suggest that the Black Death had claimed the lives of around 25 million people, roughly a third of Europe's population at the time. That's equivalent to the entire population of Australia today suddenly vanishing. Chew on that for a moment. But let's talk about the medieval European reaction, shall we? Panic and superstition ran through the streets like a medieval flash mob. People believed this was divine punishment, an apocalypse on a grand scale. The religious went into overdrive, whipping themselves in public displays of contrition that, frankly, seemed more likely to spread disease than stop it. Flagellant processions were the medieval equivalent of an ill-advised viral trend, except with more self-inflicted pain and less catchy music. Medicine of the time was, shall we say, less than effective. Doctors, clad in those infamous bird-like masks, part gas mask, part fashion faux pas, stuffed with herbs and spices, attempted to ward off the plague. It was as if they took a page from a cookbook instead of a medical manual. Despite their best efforts, the treatments often involved methods that would make modern medicine cringe. Bloodletting, leeches, and concoctions that might have been better suited for a witch's cauldron than a sick room. In the midst of this chaos, the economy took a nosedive. With a third of the workforce gone, fields lay fallow, and skilled labor was as rare as a unicorn siding. The price of labor soared, and those who survived found themselves in higher demand than ever before. Suddenly, peasants had bargaining power, a silver lining in a very dark cloud. It was as if the plague had unwittingly turned the tables, setting the stage for a slow but inevitable shift in the social order. The Black Death didn't just decimate populations, it reshaped the very fabric of medieval society. The belief in a stable, unchanging world crumbled alongside the lives it claimed. People questioned long-held truths, and in the wake of such tremendous loss, the seeds of change were sown. But before those seeds could take root, Europe had to survive one of the darkest chapters in its history, a time when life was as fragile as a whisper in the wind. And so, the Black Death wasn't just a footnote in history. It was more like a seismic event that shook the foundations of medieval life. It forced society to confront its vulnerabilities, and in doing so, paved the way for transformation. But that's a story for another day. For now, we'll leave medieval Europe scrambling for answers, clutching their herbs, and hoping for a miracle amidst the darkness. Medieval Europe, grappling for a miracle amidst the darkness, was about to discover that the plague's impact wasn't just about death and devastation. Beneath the grim statistics and the macabre dance of the flagellants, a seismic shift was underway. This was no gentle nudge towards change. It was a full-blown social earthquake, and the epicenter was the decimated population. Let's dig into the dirt of this upheaval. Remember the feudal system, that rigid hierarchy where peasants toiled away for their lords, with the promise of protection that, in reality, was about as reliable as a medieval weather forecast. Well, the Black Death took a sledgehammer to that structure. With a third of the population gone, labor became a rare commodity. Fields, once bustling with peasants, now lay abandoned, and lords found themselves in a bit of a pickle. They needed workers to till the land, but there simply weren't enough serfs to go around. Cue the rise of the wage laborer. In a twist that would have economists reaching for their textbooks, peasants suddenly had leverage. It was as if the universe had handed them the medieval equivalent of a golden ticket. Labor shortages meant that workers could demand higher wages and better conditions. And boy, did they seize the opportunity. Imagine a peasant, once tethered to the land like a forgotten medieval iPhone charger, now strutting into negotiations with a newfound sense of swagger. You want me to plow your fields? Sure, but it'll cost you. The numbers tell the story. In some areas, wages doubled, and in others they tripled. The cost of labor soared, and for the first time, the peasantry was in a position to dictate terms. It was a collective bargaining revolution before the term even existed. And let's not forget the irony here. This empowerment came on the coattails of a tragedy that had wiped out their friends and families. It's like winning the lottery the day after your house burns down. But hold on to your plowshares, because the societal shake-up didn't stop at wages. The old feudal contracts, as unbreakable as a medieval chastity belt, were being rewritten. Serfs who had been chained to the land by ancestral ties found themselves with the freedom to move. If a lord wouldn't meet their demands, they could pack up and offer their services elsewhere. This newfound mobility was like the medieval version of upgrading from dial-up to broadband. Suddenly, peasants weren't just peasants. They were participants in an emerging labor market. Meanwhile, the lords, who once wielded power like kings on their own little plots of land, were scrambling. Some tried to enforce the old laws, clinging to their feudal rights like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. Others, recognizing the changing tides, became more flexible, offering incentives to keep workers. It was a time of adaptation or extinction for the nobility. The Statute of Labourers, enacted in England in 1351, attempted to put a lid on wage inflation by capping pay rates and restricting worker mobility. But here's the kicker. It was about as effective as a medieval cure for the plague. Workers, buoyed by their new bargaining power, simply ignored it. The law was as toothless as a medieval peasant after a lifetime of poor dental hygiene. And so, the social order was turned on its head. The feudal system, once as solid as a castle wall, was showing cracks. The Black Death had inadvertently sown the seeds of a more dynamic economy, one where the rigid hierarchy of lord and serf was giving way to something new. It was a world where merit, at least in terms of labor, was beginning to matter more than birthright. The societal metamorphosis wasn't just a footnote in history, it was a prelude to the modern world. As the dust settled, a new reality dawned. The survivors, those who had weathered the storm, found themselves in a landscape where opportunity, albeit born of tragedy, was within reach. The Black Death, with its shadow of death and despair, had unwittingly set the stage for a transformation that would ripple through the centuries. But the story doesn't end here. There's more to unravel as Europe stands on the cusp of change, ready or not. As the dust settled, a new reality dawned. The survivors, those who had weathered the storm, found themselves in a landscape where opportunity, albeit born of tragedy, was within reach. The Black Death, with its shadow of death and despair, had unwittingly set the stage for a transformation that would ripple through the centuries. But the story doesn't end here. There's more to unravel as Europe stands on the cusp of change, ready or not. Now, let's pivot from the economic upheaval and dive into the social and cultural tornado that the Black Death whipped up. The feudal system wasn't the only thing to take a hit. The church, that towering institution with a monopoly on medieval souls, found its grip slipping like a greased eel. You see, when the plague rolled through town like a reaper on steroids, people started asking some uncomfortable questions. Why, oh why, is God punishing us? Was a common refrain, and not in a rhetorical, Sunday sermon kind of way. The pious masses, who had for centuries believed that divine intervention was the answer to life's woes, suddenly found themselves wondering if perhaps the church didn't have all the answers after all. The clergy, instead of providing the expected divine insight, were dropping like flies alongside their congregants. It's hard to maintain your spiritual authority when you're as susceptible to the plague as the next guy. With priests dying at a similar rate as their flocks, the church's assurances of heavenly protection were looking a bit threadbare. And let's not sugarcoat it. The church's response to the crisis was, shall we say, a mixed bag. On one hand, there were those who doubled down on the fire and brimstone sermons, insisting that the plague was divine retribution for humanity's sins. On the other hand, there were the more pragmatic clergy who sought to comfort their congregations, even if it meant admitting that, perhaps, they didn't have all the answers. This crisis of faith led to a diversification of spiritual beliefs. Some people clung tighter to their religious convictions, while others began to explore alternative spiritualities, setting the stage for the Reformation's eventual roll call a couple of centuries later. Meanwhile, as the church was doing damage control, art and literature were having a bit of a renaissance. Not the Renaissance, mind you, but a macabre and existential one. Death, which had always been lurking in the background of medieval life like a bad smell, now took center stage. Artists and writers started channeling their inner Edgar Allan Poe, centuries before he was even a twinkle in the literary eye. The dance macabre, or dance of death, became a popular motif, vividly depicting skeletons leading the living in a morbid jig. It was as if art had put on a black cloak and decided to throw a party. These images served as a stark reminder of life's fragility and the inevitability of death, a reflection of the collective trauma and newfound existentialism pervading society. It's almost as if the survivors were saying, if we're going to go, we might as well do it with some style. Literature took a similar turn. Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, penned during this era, subtly captures the societal shifts. While not overtly about the plague, the tales reflect the diversity of voices and the growing skepticism towards traditional authority. Boccaccio's The Decameron, on the other hand, doesn't hold back. Set against the backdrop of the Black Death, It presents a tapestry of stories that range from the comedic to the tragic, illustrating how people coped with the chaos around them. These cultural shifts weren't just about doom and gloom, though. They marked a significant turning point in the human psyche, a shift from a passive acceptance of fate to a more questioning, and dare we say, rebellious outlook. It was as if society had collectively decided that if life was going to be unpredictable and short, they might as well make the most of it. This was the medieval version of Carpe Diem, a rallying cry for a more individualistic and less dogmatically constrained approach to life. In this brave new world, the seeds of the Renaissance were quietly germinating, fertilized by the very despair and questioning that the Black Death had sown. The Church, while still a formidable force, found itself in a more competitive spiritual marketplace. Its congregation, once captive, now had a taste for exploration, not just of new ideas, but of the world and their place in it. So here we stand, looking out over a landscape that has been profoundly reshaped by the Black Death. The traditional social structures are crumbling, the Church's hold is loosening, and art is reflecting a new, darker reality. It's a world where the old certainties no longer hold sway, where people are starting to think for themselves, albeit cautiously. The medieval world is on the brink of transformation, with the Black Death acting as both catalyst and crucible. And yet, we're not done. Europe is still grappling with the aftermath, still trying to make sense of the chaos that has been unleashed. The old world is dying, but a new one is struggling to be born. Stay tuned as we continue to peel back the layers of history, revealing the complex tapestry of change woven by the most infamous pandemic in history. As the dust from the Black Death settled, medieval Europe found itself in a political landscape as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. It was a time when power dynamics were shifting faster than a medieval knight could draw his sword. Kings and local lords, once sitting comfortably atop their thrones, now found themselves grappling with a populace that was, shall we say, a bit more feisty than before. Let's start with the big guns, monarchs. Imagine being a king in the 14th century, suddenly faced with the grim reality that divine right doesn't shield you from a pandemic. The Black Death played no favorites. It didn't matter if you were a peasant or a prince. Everyone was fair game. This left many royal households scrambling to maintain control over their realms. The sheer number of deaths led to a bureaucratic nightmare, with local officials dropping like flies. In England, for instance, the mortality rate among clergy, who often doubled as administrative officials, was estimated at a staggering 40%. This left gaping holes in governance that kings struggled to fill. Some rulers took this chaos as an opportunity to tighten their grip on power. Take Charles V of France, for instance. He saw the Black Death as a chance to centralize authority. With local governance in disarray, he swooped in like a political vulture, reclaiming lands and reinforcing royal decrees. He transformed the French monarchy into a more bureaucratic machine, setting the stage for the absolute monarchies that would later dominate Europe. It was a masterclass in turning disaster into opportunity, albeit one that relied on a fair bit of opportunistic elbow grease. But not everyone was as crafty or lucky. In 1358, France faced the Jacquerie, a peasant revolt that erupted in response to the oppressive conditions exacerbated by the plague. The peasants, emboldened by their recent economic leverage and fed up with oppressive taxes, took up arms. They weren't just knocking on the doors of their overlords, they were tearing them down. This revolt was brutally suppressed, but it left a lasting scar on the French nobility, a reminder that their power was no longer as absolute as it once seemed. England, too, was feeling the heat. The Statute of Labourers, meant to cap wages and keep the peasantry in check, was more of a polite suggestion than a binding law. The English monarchy, under King Edward Roman III, found itself struggling to enforce these edicts. The labour crisis and the subsequent rise in wages gave peasants an unprecedented voice in their own affairs. It was like the universe had handed them a microphone at the concert of history, and they were using it to demand change. Fast forward a few decades, and we have the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Inspired by economic grievances and fueled by the desire for social reform, this uprising was a direct challenge to the established order. Led by figures like Wat Tyler, the rebels marched on London, demanding an end to serfdom and oppressive taxation. It was a bold move, a medieval mic drop, if you will. and it sent shockwaves through the English aristocracy. Although the revolt was ultimately quashed, it highlighted the growing tension between the ruling class and the ruled. It was a clear sign that the days of unquestioned feudal dominance were numbered. Then there's the curious case of the Holy Roman Empire. This sprawling entity was a patchwork quilt of territories, each with its own ruler and its own agenda. The Black Death only served to accentuate these divisions, as local lords sought to consolidate their power amidst the chaos. Emperors like Charles Roman IV realized that the old model of governance was fraying at the seams. In response, they implemented reforms like the Golden Bull of 1356, which aimed to standardize the election of emperors and bring some semblance of order to the empire's sprawling territories. It was an attempt to impose structure on a political landscape that was rapidly devolving into a free-for-all. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this political upheaval was the rise of new power players, cities. As the traditional nobility saw their influence wane, urban centers began to assert themselves. Trade routes, once mere veins in the body politic, became vital arteries of commerce and power. Cities like Venice and Florence, having weathered the storm of the plague, emerged as economic powerhouses. They wielded influence not through the sword, but through the purse. It was a shift from might to money, a harbinger of the capitalist age to come. In this climate of uncertainty and change, the concept of governance itself was being redefined. Black Death had exposed the vulnerabilities of the feudal system and left a power vacuum that couldn't be filled by traditional means alone. New alliances were forged, new ideas took root, and the seeds of modern statehood began to sprout. It was a political renaissance born from the ashes of devastation, a testament to humanity's ability to adapt and evolve in the face of adversity. Yet, for all the chaos and upheaval, the story was far from over. The dust had settled, but the winds of change continued to blow, reshaping the landscape of medieval Europe in ways that would define the centuries to come. As rulers and subjects alike grappled with the new reality, the stage was set for further conflict and transformation. The Black Death may have been a catalyst, but the drama of history was only beginning to unfold. Stay with me as we continue to untangle the web of events that followed, as Europe stepped cautiously into a new era, forever altered by the spectre of the plague. As Europe cautiously tiptoed into this new era, one could almost hear the collective sigh of relief, a breath that acknowledged not only survival, but the dawn of a renaissance. No, not just the capital R Renaissance with its art and opulence, but a renaissance of ideas, of questioning, of shaking the dust off those medieval constraints that had held society in a vice grip for centuries. Let's be clear, the Black Death wasn't just a medieval horror movie, it was the great disruptor. It hit the reset button on society's expectations and norms. Take medicine, for instance. Before the plague, European medicine was a curious cocktail of superstition, guesswork, and a touch of astrology for good measure. Doctors relied on the four humors theory, a concept that today would be laughed out of a high school biology class. But the plague, with its grim efficiency, forced a re-evaluation of these ancient practices. The demand for more effective medical solutions became as persistent as a medieval bard with a lute and a repertoire of only one song. In the wake of the devastation, medical schools began to pop up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. The University of Montpellier in France, already a beacon of medical study, saw its influence grow, as did Italy's Salerno. They started to emphasize empirical observation over inherited dogma. Imagine that, using actual patient observations to figure out what ails you. Revolutionary. This shift laid the groundwork for the scientific method, planting the seeds for future luminaries like Vesalius and Harvey to eventually sprout. Public health also started to inch its way out of the Dark Ages. The sheer scale of the tragedy highlighted the need for better hygiene and urban planning. In places like Venice, quarantine stations known as lazarettos became a staple, an early attempt to cordon off disease. It was a classic case of too little, too late, but hey, at least they were trying. And those bird-like plague masks, they didn't just make doctors look like rejected extras from a horror flick. They symbolized a rudimentary understanding that disease might just be something you could catch from the air or direct contact. Now, it wasn't all about the practical stuff. The Black Death also wove its way into the fabric of culture and storytelling, leaving a mark that resonates to this day. The Grim Reaper, that ever-timely symbol of mortality, started appearing more frequently in art and literature. This wasn't just a medieval Garth phase. It was a reflection of an era coming to grips with its own frailty. Fast forward to today, and you still see echoes of this in everything from Halloween costumes to existentialist literature. The plague's shadow was long, and its cultural fingerprints are as indelible as a tattoo on a rock star. Economically, the plague was a wrecking ball, but also a bizarre opportunity. It shook up the agrarian economy, paving the way for a more diversified and urbanized society. Cities became hives of activity, driving trade and innovation. The contraction of the labor force meant that wages rose, and with that came a rise in disposable income, a concept as foreign to medieval peasants as smartphones. This newfound economic clout of the lower classes started a slow but steady erosion of the old feudal order. The medieval world was opening up to new possibilities, and with it, a burgeoning middle class began to flex its muscles. Politically, the Black Death was like a chess game where half the pieces got swept off the board. The survivors had to adapt, and fast. Monarchs learned that ruling by divine right wasn't enough. They needed to be more savvy, more centralized, and occasionally even more democratic. The seeds of nation-states were planted in this fertile, though tragic, soil. The 100 Years' War, for instance, wasn't just about crowns and rivalries. It was also a crucible of change. The war's demands on resources and manpower pushed governments to innovate in administration and taxation, creating structures that would underpin modern states. War is hell, as they say, but it's also one heck of a catalyst for change. In the broader sweep of history, the Black Death was a turning point. It was the bitter medicine that medieval Europe had to swallow, the harsh wake-up call that prompted an entire continent to rethink its priorities. It nudged a society mired in mysticism and rigid hierarchy toward a future where humanism and scientific inquiry would lead the charge. The Renaissance, with its explosion of art, science, and culture, was the phoenix rising from the plague's ashes. And while we love to romanticize this rebirth, let's not forget the gritty reality from which it sprang. Even today, the plague's legacy continues to influence us. Public health measures, the very idea of quarantine, the push for scientific discovery, these are all echoes of a past that was shaped by a tiny, deadly bacterium. In many ways, the story of the Black Death is a testament to human resilience, our ability to adapt and innovate in the face of overwhelming adversity. It's a reminder that even the darkest clouds can have a silver lining, though sometimes you have to squint pretty hard to see it. So, as you tuck yourself into bed tonight, remember this. The Black Death may have been history's most infamous pandemic, but it was also a catalyst for change, a crucible from which modern Europe emerged, bruised but not broken. It was a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity, our refusal to be defined by tragedy alone. And that, dear listener, is a story worth knowing. Sleep well, armed with the knowledge that even in the darkest times, there's a path forward, lit by the flickering candle of human perseverance. Babba wasn't just a guy with a sword and a dream. He was more like a real estate mogul with a vision, minus the glossy brochures. When he waltzed into India in 1526, he didn't just bring along an army, he brought ambition. And not just any kind of ambition, but the kind that drips with grandeur, glitter, and a whole lot of domes. The Mughals had a taste for impressive digs, and Babba's entry was the architectural equivalent of a Netflix pilot episode. Spoiler alert, it's a hit. Babba kicked things off with the Battle of Panipat, where he trounced the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, despite being outnumbered. That's right, folks, Babba's 15,000 men took on Lodi's 40,000 and won. Talk about defying the odds. But enough about swords and spears. Let's talk bricks and mortar. Now, Babba himself wasn't around long enough to leave a signature building. He was more of a garden guy, really. His love affair with the Persian-style garden was the opening act for the Mughal architectural saga, planting the seeds, quite literally, for what was to come. After all, even empires need a good blueprint. Enter Humayun, Babba's son, who brought a little more to the table than just Daddy's legacy. He was the one who really got the Mughal architecture show on the road. Mughals had a penchant for the dramatic, and Humayun's tomb is a prime example. Picture this, a majestic structure with the audacity to flaunt not one, not two, but 56 white marble domes, all while sitting pretty in the middle of a charbagh, a Persian-style garden divided into 4 parts. If you're keeping track, that's 4 more parts than my backyard. Completed in 1571, this tomb wasn't just a place to park Humayun's remains, it was the architectural equivalent of the Beatles releasing their first album. Sure, it was just a tomb, but it had style, grace, and a certain je ne sais quoi that screamed, "I'm here to stay." It was designed by Merak Mirza Gears, a Persian architect, which explains the whole Persia meets India vibe. The construction took roughly 9 years and cost about 5 million rupees, a small fortune back then when you consider that a skilled artisan might earn just a few rupees a month. Humayun's tomb was a game-changer, laying the foundation, literally and figuratively, for Mughal architectural style. Think of it as the architectural warm-up act for the Taj Mahal. It's got the whole package, symmetry, grandeur, and a sense of eternity. Not to mention, it was the first garden tomb on the Indian subcontinent, a 2-for-1 deal if you will. But before you get swept away by the romance of it all, let's not forget the less glamorous side. The construction of such marvels was no small feat, nor was it a labor of love for everyone involved. The laborers who toiled under the scorching sun were far from the romantic vision of a grand empire. For them, it was more about survival than artistry. And while the finished product is a beauty to behold, the reality check is that it was built on the backs of countless workers who are nameless in history. Yet, there's no denying the Mughals' knack for turning stone and mortar into poetry. Humayun's tomb set the stage, but the real showstopper was yet to come. Babur might have kicked things off, but Humayun's architectural ambitions were a prelude to the Taj Mahal, which would be the piece de resistance of Mughal architecture. Humayun's tomb was like the iPhone 1, impressive for its time, but everyone was waiting to see what came next. So, as the sun set on that era, the Mughals were just warming up, laying the groundwork for what would become one of the most iconic periods of architectural innovation in history. It was a time when the Mughal Empire was not just about power and politics, but about leaving a legacy in stone. A legacy that would echo through the ages, long after the last brick was laid. And so, as Humayun's architectural ambitions were setting the stage, enter Akbar, the Mughal Empire's third ruler and quite possibly its most industrious architect. Now, Akbar wasn't just about building monuments, he was about building legacies. You could say he was the Steve Jobs of the Mughal Empire, but instead of iPhones, he was reinventing India's skyline. Let's kick things off with Fireplace, Akbar's piece de resistance. Picture this, a city rising from the dusty plains of Uttar Pradesh, a vision of red sandstone and white marble like a jewel in the desert. Built between 1571 and 1585, Fireplace wasn't just a city, it was a statement, a bold declaration that the Mughals were here to stay, and they were going to leave an architectural footprint that'd make even the most seasoned builders weak in the knees. Why build a new capital, you ask? Well, Akbar, being the visionary he was, had this penchant for fresh starts and new beginnings. He was kind of like that friend who keeps moving cities in search of the perfect vibe. Legend has it, Akbar chose this particular spot due to a prophecy by the Sufi saint, Salim Kishti, who predicted the birth of an heir. But let's not kid ourselves. Prophecy or no prophecy, Akbar had an eye for real estate that would make any modern Mughal proud. Now, let's talk numbers because, as they say, the devil is in the details, and in the budget overruns. Akbar's grand vision was not cheap. Constructing Fireplace cost an eye-watering 3 million rupees, which, if you adjusted for inflation, could probably buy you a small island today. And while Akbar's coffers might have been as deep as his architectural dreams, even he had to grapple with the practicalities of running an empire. Fireplace was a melting pot of architectural styles, Persian elegance mixed with Indian artistry. This was a city that celebrated diversity, not just in its buildings, but in its very ethos. Akbar, always the forward-thinking ruler, was a fan of inclusivity long before it became a buzzword. This was reflected in his architectural choices, which brought together artists and craftsmen from all over his empire. You could say he was the original cultural ambassador, using architecture as his medium. Despite its grandeur, Faidaporsikri was short-lived as the Mughal capital. Why, you ask? Well, the city faced a slight issue with water supply, an oversight that even the grandest of visions couldn't rectify. Turns out, building a city in a semi-arid region without adequate water sources is a bit like buying a Ferrari with no fuel. You can admire it all you want, but it's not going anywhere. By 1585, the city was abandoned as the capital, a testament to the fact that even emperors can't escape practicalities. But even as a ghost town, Faidaporsikri remains a marvel. The Buland Darwaza, its main gateway, stands at a towering 54 meters, as if daring anyone to ignore the audacity of its creator. The city itself is an architectural dreamscape, with the Diwan-i-Khars, a private audience hall, showcasing a central pillar that looks like the brainchild of an avant-garde designer. It's a reminder of Akbar's desire to blend form with philosophy, a space where he held debates with scholars from various religions, embodying his quest for knowledge and understanding. Now, let's pivot to Akbar's other architectural exploits. He wasn't content with just one masterpiece. He was like a kid in a candy store, with India as his playground. The Agra fort, another testament to his vision, was transformed from a brick fort into a sprawling complex of red sandstone, completed in 1573. This wasn't just a fort. It was a fortress of power, a place that spoke volumes about Mughal might and magnificence. But Akbar's innovations went beyond bricks and mortar. His embrace of cultural inclusivity was also a political strategy. By integrating diverse artistic styles, he was sending a message to the world. The Mughals were not conquerors, they were unifiers. Akbar's empire was a tapestry of cultures, and his architecture was the needle that stitched it all together. In a time when empires were often built on exclusion, Akbar's inclusive policies were as revolutionary as his buildings. Yet, for all his grandeur, Akbar's projects were not without their challenges. The frequent relocations of his court were like a game of musical chairs, but with palaces. Each move required a massive logistical effort, from building new structures to ensuring that the empire's administration ran smoothly. It's a wonder he didn't just give up and build a giant RV. As we marvel at Akbar's contributions to architecture, it's crucial to remember the laborers who turned his visions into reality. These were the unsung heroes, the artisans and workers whose sweat and toil laid the foundation for an empire's legacy. While Akbar may have been the mastermind, it was their hands that carved the stone, their feet that trod the scaffolds. In the grand tapestry of Mughal history, Akbar stands out not just for his buildings, but for what they represented: a harmonious blend of cultures, a commitment to progress, and a legacy that would influence generations to come. But let's not wrap this up with a neat bow just yet. There's more to uncover, more layers to peel back as we continue to explore the architectural wonders of the Mughals. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into this fascinating era, where every stone tells a story, and every monument is a testament to the empire's enduring impact. And so, with the echoes of Akbar's grand architectural symphony still resonating, the stage was set for the next act in the Mughal drama. Enter Shah Jahan, the emperor who would take the concept of grandeur and turn it into an art form. If Akbar was the Steve Jobs of the Mughal world, Shah Jahan was its Leonardo da Vinci, albeit with a slightly bigger budget and an entire empire at his disposal. Shah Jahan's reign is synonymous with the Taj Mahal, that iconic monument of love and loss, which stands as both a testament to architectural brilliance and an epitome of opulence. But before we get lost in the romance of white marble under moonlit skies, let's pull back the curtain on the practicalities and nitty-gritty that brought this marvel to life. Spoiler alert, it's not all love poems and moonlit serenades. The Taj Mahal, often referred to as a teardrop on the cheek of time, was commissioned in 1632 and took a whopping 22 years to complete. That's longer than some empires have lasted. The construction required the labor of around 20,000 workers, a veritable army of artisans, craftsmen, and laborers, working tirelessly under the harsh Indian sun. They came from various parts of the empire, bringing diverse skills that blended to create this architectural symphony. It was like the Avengers assembling, but instead of saving the world, they were building a monument. And speaking of the world, The materials used in the Taj Mahal weren't just locally sourced. Oh no, Shah Jahan had a penchant for the exotic. Marble from Rajasthan, jasper from Punjab, turquoise from Tibet, jade from China, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. It was as if he had a frequent flyer program for stones. This global shopping spree wasn't cheap either. The total cost of building the Taj Mahal, an estimated 32 million rupees, which, adjusted for today's inflation, could probably fund a small space program. Now, let's tackle the romanticized tale of the Taj Mahal being a monument to eternal love. Legend has it, Shah Jahan built this masterpiece in memory of his favorite wife, Mumtaz Mahal, who tragically passed away during childbirth. While that makes for a poignant love story, it glosses over the fact that Shah Jahan had multiple wives and a harem that would make even the most enthusiastic polygamist blush. The truth is, while he may have loved Mumtaz dearly, the Taj Mahal was also a statement, a colossal testament to his power and wealth, a way to immortalize not just his beloved, but himself as well. But here's where the plot thickens. The construction of the Taj Mahal didn't just strain the empire's coffers, it stretched its very fabric. The immense cost of the project drained resources that could have been used elsewhere. Meanwhile, the economy was feeling the pressure, and the empire's subjects weren't exactly dancing in the streets. In fact, the financial strain was so significant that it contributed to the economic downturn during the latter years of Shah Jahan's reign. It's like maxing out your credit card for a diamond ring while your house is falling apart. As the Taj Mahal rose majestically by the Yamuna River, the Mughal Empire was beginning to show cracks of its own. Shah Jahan's obsession with architecture and luxury led to increased taxes and widespread dissatisfaction. This was a time when the empire should have been shoring up its defenses and stabilizing its economy, but instead it was focused on aesthetics over pragmatics. It's the historical equivalent of buying a Ferrari while your driveway is a dirt road. And let's not forget the laborers, the unsung heroes who transformed vision into reality. Their toil, sweat, and perhaps even their tears were the real foundation of the Taj Mahal. These were skilled craftsmen, stonemasons, and artisans, many of whom were brought in from distant lands, working under conditions that were far from the romanticized image of noble artists creating a masterpiece. It was labor-intensive work, with little recognition or reward beyond the daily wage that barely kept them afloat. While the Taj Mahal stands as a marvel of engineering and design, it also serves as a reminder of the complexities beneath its serene exterior. It's easy to get swept away by the beauty and the romance, but it's just as important to acknowledge the reality, the economic burden, the laborious construction, and the empire's shifting fortunes. Shah Jahan's dream was a double-edged sword, a beacon of beauty that cast shadows of economic strain and social unrest. Yet, for all its complexities, the Taj Mahal remains a symbol of enduring beauty and architectural excellence. It was the pinnacle of Mughal architecture, a blend of Persian, Islamic, and Indian styles that created something truly unique. The central dome, standing at a towering 73 meters, is surrounded by 4 smaller domes and 4 minarets that frame the structure, as if standing guard over its splendor. The intricate inlay work, known as pietra dura, is a testament to the craftsmanship and artistry that went into its creation. Precious stones were meticulously carved and fitted into the marble, forming exquisite floral patterns that catch the light in a way that's almost magical. It's a visual symphony, a dance of light and shadow that captivates all who gaze upon it. But as we admire the beauty and craftsmanship, let's not forget the empire's realities. The Mughal Empire was beginning to falter, and Shah Jahan's son, Aurangzeb, would soon take the reins. His reign would mark a departure from the artistic and cultural pursuits of his predecessors, as he focused more on military conquests and religious orthodoxy. The Taj Mahal, while a crowning achievement, was also a turning point. It marked the end of an era of opulence and the beginning of a more austere chapter in Mughal history. It was a period where the empire would face new challenges, both from within and without. As Shah Jahan's world revolved around marble and minarets, the empire was on the cusp of change, a change that would redefine its legacy and its place in history. So, as we marvel at the Taj Mahal's beauty and ponder its history, let's remember that it's more than just a symbol of love. It's a monument to ambition, a reflection of an empire at its zenith, and a harbinger of the trials to come. The Mughal story is far from over, and the next chapters promise to be as compelling as the ones we've explored. Stay tuned, because there's much more to uncover in the saga of the Mughals, where every stone tells a story and every shadow holds a secret. As the shimmering reflection of the Taj Mahal began to settle in the Yamuna, the Mughal Empire found itself on the cusp of a new era, one that traded in the glitter of marble for the cold steel of practicality. Enter Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan's son, who ruled from 1658 to 1707 and was more likely to commission a fortress than a Farley. If Shah Jahan was the Michelangelo of Mughal architecture, Aurangzeb was its Machiavelli, focused, austere, and ready to swap opulence for efficiency like a CEO in a budget crisis. Aurangzeb's reign marked a sharp pivot from the artistic indulgence of his forefathers. You see, by the time Aurangzeb ascended the throne, the empire's wallet was feeling lighter than a feather in a strong wind. The monumental expenses of his predecessors, particularly the Taj Mahal, had left the treasury resembling an overdrawn bank account after a particularly wild shopping spree. It was time to tighten the purse strings. Economic pressures were mounting, and Aurangzeb responded not with grandiose monuments, but with strategic, militaristic construction. His architectural legacy is defined less by the beauty of a well-placed minaret and more by the intimidating bulk of a solid fort wall. The man had a knack for turning stone into strongholds, focusing on fortifications like the Red Fort at Delhi and the Fort of Dawladabad. There was no room for frills, just function over form. Let's break it down. Fort Dawladabad, originally built by the Yadavas, was transformed under Aurangzeb's watchful eye into a fortress of formidable defense. Nestled in the Deccan Plateau, it was a strategic linchpin, and Aurangzeb knew it. This fort wasn't just a place to hang his imperial hat. It was a testament to the empire's military might, a bastion against the growing Maratha threat. The Deccan Wars, which occupied much of Aurangzeb's reign, required a robust network of defenses, and Dawladabad was its crown jewel. But why the shift to fortifications, you ask? Well, Aurangzeb's reign was a time of political turbulence. The empire was sprawling, and maintaining control over its far-flung territories required more than just a few pretty buildings. The Marathas, led by the indomitable Shivaji, were rising as a formidable force, challenging the Mughal grip on the Deccan. In this climate, fortresses weren't just stone and mortar. They were statements of power, control, and most importantly, deterrence. Aurangzeb's architectural endeavors also extended to religious structures, but with a twist. While his predecessors had championed the construction of stunning mosques that doubled as architectural marvels, Aurangzeb's mosques were more about piety than pomp. Take the Badshahi Mosque in Lahore, commissioned in 1671. It's a grand structure, sure, but its beauty is in its simplicity, a reflection of Aurangzeb's own austere religious devotion. Built at a cost of 600,000 rupees, it was financed by the state, yet another reminder of how Aurangzeb's priorities lay in spreading religious influence rather than architectural innovation. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, Aurangzeb's reputation as a destroyer of cultural heritage. It's a narrative as old as time, yet often oversimplified. Yes, he's been accused of demolishing temples and imposing Islamic architecture. But these actions were not just about religious zeal. They were strategic moves aimed at consolidating power and eliminating potential sources of rebellion. A temple here, a mosque there. It was about control, not just conversion. He was less the mad architect, more the shrewd tactician, wielding stone like a political weapon. But let's not paint Aurangzeb as a one-dimensional villain. His reign, marked by frugality, was also a response to the empire's economic realities. Unlike Shah Jahan, who spent like a lottery winner, Aurangzeb was all about fiscal responsibility. He even took to weaving prayer caps as a personal austerity measure. In a way, his architectural choices were a reflection of his pragmatic, if somewhat ascetic, approach to governance. Yet this pragmatism came with its own set of problems. Aurangzeb's focus on military expansion and religious orthodoxy left little room for economic reform or cultural patronage. The empire's coffers, already strained, were further depleted by continuous military campaigns. The cost of maintaining such a vast empire was enormous, and with trade routes disrupted by constant warfare, revenue streams were drying up faster than a puddle in the Rajasthan sun. Aurangzeb's reign, while extending the empire's boundaries, also sowed the seeds of its eventual decline. The emphasis on military might and religious conformity alienated many of the empire's subjects, particularly in the Deccan, where local resistance was fierce. For all his military prowess, Aurangzeb's empire was like a sandcastle at high tide, impressive but ultimately unsustainable. And so, as the sun set on Aurangzeb's era, the Mughal Empire stood at a crossroads. The fortresses he built, the mosques he commissioned, and the temples he dismantled were all part of a complex tapestry of power, faith, and survival. But beneath this tapestry, the empire was beginning to unravel, its foundations weakened by economic strain and social unrest. The architectural legacy of Aurangzeb was not one of lavish beauty, but of stark realism, a testament to a ruler who, for better or worse, chose practicality over pomp. Yet, despite the challenges, there was a certain resilience to Aurangzeb's strategy, a recognition that the empire needed more than just monuments to endure. It needed to adapt, to fortify, and to survive in a world that was rapidly changing. Aurangzeb's reign was not the end, but a turning point, a moment where the Mughal story began to shift from expansion to introspection, from building outwardly to reinforcing within. As we stand on the precipice of the next chapter, the Mughal Empire's story is far from over. The echoes of Aurangzeb's reign, with its unyielding focus on defense and doctrine, continue to resonate as we prepare to explore the aftershocks of his rule. What comes next is a tale of resilience and reinvention, where the remnants of past grandeur face the realities of a world in flux. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the story, where history's shadows are as telling as its highlights, and where every stone has its say. With the echoes of Aurangzeb's reign still reverberating through the corridors of power, the Mughal Empire wasn't just facing a crossroads. It was staring down a multi-lane highway of potential futures. The architecture of the Mughals, while no longer expanding, was already casting a long shadow over the subcontinent, a shadow that would stretch far beyond the crumbling walls of its forts. Fast forward to modern India, and you'll find that the Mughal architectural legacy is alive and kicking, even if the empire itself has long since faded into history. From the intricate jalis of Jaipur to the bulbous domes of Delhi, Mughal influence is as ubiquitous as chai and cricket. But let's not just stroll down memory lane, admiring the scenery. Let's dive into how these structures have shaped the India we know today. First off, let's talk about influence. The kind that doesn't just linger but actively shapes the future. The Mughal penchant for symmetry and grandeur wasn't just a phase. It was a full-blown architectural gospel that contemporary designers continue to preach. Take Lutyens' Delhi, for instance. When British architects set about designing New Delhi in the early 20th century, they didn't just wing it. They borrowed heavily from the Mughal blueprint, adopting elements like wide boulevards and grand vistas that mirrored the imperial ambitions of the Mughals themselves. It's like the British Empire looked at the Mughal playbook and said, "We'll have what they're having." And then there's the tourism industry, which owes a considerable debt to the Mughals. The Taj Mahal alone attracts over 7 million visitors annually, a staggering figure that makes it not just a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but an economic powerhouse. It's a bit like having a cash cow that also happens to be a global icon of love, or at least that's how the brochures sell it. But while tourists flock to snap selfies in front of its marble facade, they're also contributing to a multi-billion-dollar industry that supports countless jobs and local businesses. The Mughals may have been dethroned, but their monuments are still very much in power. Yet, while we wax lyrical about the grandeur, let's not lose sight of the complex narratives these structures encapsulate. The Mughals, for all their artistic flair, were no strangers to the darker side of empire building. The very stones that form the Taj Mahal were laid by laborers who toiled under harsh conditions, more concerned with survival than with creating a masterpiece. It's a story repeated in the construction of Fatehpur Sikri and the Red Fort, magnificent structures built on the backbone of human endurance. But how do we reconcile the myth with the reality? Can we admire the beauty while acknowledging the suffering? The answer is a resounding yes. History is messy, a tapestry woven with threads of triumph and tragedy. To appreciate Mughal architecture is to appreciate this complexity, to see beyond the domes, and minarets to the human stories etched in every stone. And let's not forget the socio-political implications of these architectural marvels. The Mughals were masterful propagandists, using architecture as a tool of statecraft. Each mosque and mausoleum was a statement of power, a way to cement their legacy in stone. Even today, these structures continue to serve as potent symbols of cultural identity and historical pride, reminding us of an era when India was at the heart of a vast and interconnected world. So, what's the takeaway from this architectural saga? It's that the Mughal legacy is not just about what was built, but what was left behind, an enduring influence that continues to shape the cultural and economic landscape of modern India. It's a legacy that invites us to look beyond the surface, to see both the beauty and the burden of history. As we walk the paths laid by emperors and artisans alike, we find ourselves part of a narrative that's as old as time, yet as relevant as the next sunrise. In the end, the Mughal story is a testament to the enduring power of human creativity and ambition. It teaches us that while empires may rise and fall, their legacies are carved into the very fabric of our world, shaping our present and inspiring our future. So, the next time you find yourself gazing up at a Mughal dome or strolling through a charbagh, remember, you're not just looking at a relic of the past. You're walking through a living, breathing testament to the complexities of history, a history that continues to resonate long after the last emperor has left the stage. In the great chaotic tapestry of ancient history, Carthage was that flashy new kid on the block who, against all odds, ended up running the show. Nestled in modern-day Tunisia, Carthage was founded in the 9th century BCE by Phoenician settlers. Now, the Phoenicians weren't just any old seafaring folks. They were the original maritime entrepreneurs, making the rest of the Mediterranean look like they were dog paddling in comparison. Carthage, the shining jewel in the Phoenician tiara, didn't just survive. It thrived, evolving from a modest trading post into a powerhouse that could give the Greeks and Romans a run for their money. And boy, did they. The origins of Carthage are wrapped in the kind of romantic lore that makes historians roll their eyes and novelists swoon. According to legend, the city was founded by Queen Dido, who fled her homeland of Tyre with a boatload of followers and a dream. As the story goes, she cleverly negotiated with the locals for as much land as could be encompassed by an ox hide. If you're picturing Dido with a pair of scissors, cutting that hide into a long strip to maximize her real estate, you're not alone. It's a tale that smacks of cunning and a bit of sass, but let's be real. Carthage's success wasn't just about clever ox hide tricks. In reality, Carthage's ascension was all about location, location, location. The city's position on the North African coast was like owning beachfront property, with a killer view of the Mediterranean and direct access to trade routes that linked Africa, Europe, and the Near East. It was the ancient equivalent of sitting on a gold mine, with the added bonus of not having to dig. By the time we hit the 7th century BCE, Carthage was no longer just a dot on the map. It was the dot, commanding a vast network of trade that stretched from the Iberian Peninsula to the Levant. But let's talk ships, because that's where the real magic happened. Carthaginian vessels were the ubas of the ancient world, if ubas were giant wooden ships laden with everything from silver and tin to wine and olive oil. The Carthaginians were masters of the sea, not because they had the fanciest ships, but because they knew how to work them. Their merchant fleets were the circulatory system of Mediterranean trade, delivering goods across thousands of nautical miles with the reliability of a well-oiled machine. And they weren't just ferrying cargo. They were spreading culture, ideas, and the occasional bit of espionage. Carthage's rise wasn't just about trade, though. It was about an uncanny ability to cut deals that made Wall Street traders look like amateurs. They had this knack for turning rivals into allies, frenemies into partners, and resources into profits. The Carthaginians were the ultimate middlemen, squeezing the juice out of every opportunity like a lemon at a summer picnic. Their influence was as much about economic savvy as it was about nautical prowess. The city's governance reflected its commercial nature. It wasn't a monarchy like Rome or Athens, but was run by a council of merchants and a pair of elected magistrates known as Suffites. Think of them as the CEOs of Carthage, steering the ship of state with the precision of a seasoned captain. This political structure allowed for flexibility and adaptability, which is exactly what you need when you're dealing with the unpredictable currents of international trade. And let's not forget their secret weapon, innovation. The Carthaginians were nothing if not inventive. They developed a technique for producing purple dye from the murex snail, a painstaking process that made the color so expensive it was practically dripping with prestige. Wearing purple became a status symbol, a way to flaunt wealth and influence, and Carthage had the monopoly on it. You could say they were the trendsetters of their time, turning something as mundane as sea snails into a must-have fashion statement. But before we get too carried away with admiration, it's worth noting that Carthaginian success wasn't just a product of savvy trading and clever governance. There was a darker side, too. Their expansion often came at the expense of other cultures, and their dominance in trade sometimes meant ruthless competition. They were shrewd, yes, but also cutthroat, and their rise to power involved more than a few bloody battles and strategic marriages. It was a dog-eat-dog world, and Carthage had the biggest bite. So, what does all this mean in the grand scheme of things? Carthage wasn't just a city. It was a phenomenon, a testament to what could be achieved with a strategic mind, a willing fleet, and a bit of daring. In a world where survival often hinged on brute strength, Carthage proved that sometimes it's the brains behind the brawn that make all the difference. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of their history, one thing becomes clear. Carthage was the ultimate underdog story, and their legacy still ripples through time like waves on the Mediterranean. With Carthage's reputation as the ultimate underdog still shimmering in the Mediterranean sun, let's dive into the real meat and potatoes of their economic genius. Because, folks, it wasn't all just about steering ships and striking deals. Carthage was the Mediterranean's Swiss Army knife of commerce, and boy, did they know how to wield it. First up, let's unbox the Carthaginian economy like it's a shiny new smartphone. You see, while other civilizations were trying to figure out how to barter a goat for a sack of grain, Carthage had already moved on to the big leagues with silver coinage. And not just any silver, mind you. We're talking about the kind that jingled all the way from the rich mines of southern Spain, particularly in a place called Andalusia. Imagine a world where a single glinting coin could buy you a good deal of influence and a decent amount of wine, too. That's the kind of economic clout Carthage wielded. The Carthaginians had a bit of a love affair with precious metals, like a magpie eyeing a shiny object. Silver was their sweetheart, but gold wasn't exactly left out in the cold either. They imported it from Nubia, and when they couldn't get enough, they engineered trade routes that made sure their coffers were always overflowing. And what did they do with all that glitter? They didn't just hoard it like a dragon on its treasure pile. They used it to fuel a financial engine that powered their empire across the Mediterranean. But hold on to your togas, because the Carthaginian ports were something else entirely. Imagine the Amazon warehouses of today, except instead of drones, you had hundreds of ships, and instead of prime delivery, you had a bunch of burly sailors. Carthage ports were buzzing with activity, handling everything from the finest textiles to the most exotic spices, and all of it came with the Carthaginian guarantee of quality and a side of strategic savvy. It's tempting to picture Carthage as a peaceful trading empire, the Switzerland of the ancient world, if you will. But let's not get carried away with the fairy tale. Carthaginians weren't above playing a little dirty when it came to commerce. They loved a good monopoly, and if that meant muscling out the competition or engaging in a bit of underhanded diplomacy, so be it. Their strategic trading practices were the stuff of legend, and occasionally scandal. Take their dealings with the Etruscans, for example. The Carthaginians didn't just trade with them. They effectively took them under their wing, using their alliance to keep the Greeks at bay. It was a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and it worked like a charm. This wasn't simply business. It was a game of chess on a grand scale, with merchants and sailors as the pieces. Speaking of chess, the Carthaginians had a knack for turning the board in their favor. They invested in trade routes as if they were Starks, always on the lookout for the next big thing. When the Greeks started encroaching on their turf, Carthage tightened its grip on the Strait of Gibraltar, the ancient world's version of a toll booth on the highway to prosperity. And just like that, they could control who came in and out of the Mediterranean, making them the gatekeepers of trade. To top it off, the Carthaginians didn't just trade goods, they traded ideas. Their ports weren't just bustling with merchandise, but with stories and secrets, too. Carthage was a melting pot of cultures, and the Carthaginians were like the ancient world's social media influencers, spreading trends and knowledge across the seas. They weren't just peddling goods, they were shaping cultures, influencing politics, and sometimes ruffling a few feathers along the way. It's no wonder that the myth of a peaceful trading empire still persists. After all, who doesn't love a good story about cunning merchants and peaceful prosperity? But the truth is, Carthage wasn't just about making money. It was about power, economic power, cultural power, and the kind of power that could make or break empires. The Carthaginians were the original disruptors, shaking up the status quo and leaving an indelible mark on history. So, as we wrap up this little economic exposé, remember that Carthage was more than just a trading powerhouse. It was a complex, multifaceted force that reshaped the Mediterranean world, one deal at a time. And as we continue to unravel their story, one thing is certain. Carthage wasn't just playing the game. They were rewriting the rules and proving that in the ancient world, it wasn't just the strongest who survived, but the savviest. Now, let's plunge headlong into the whirlwind of political machinations that kept Carthage's empire afloat. Imagine a governing structure that resembled a modern corporate boardroom more than a regal throne room. Carthage was ruled by an oligarchic republic, a system as slick as a new smartphone app, and just as prone to glitches. At its heart were the Suffites, two annually elected magistrates who served as the CEOs of this ancient juggernaut. These guys were the true power players, maneuvering their way through political storms with the dexterity of a seasoned hedge fund manager. But hold on, before you start picturing a harmonious gathering of wise old men in togas. Let's get real. Carthage's political scene was as cutthroat as a reality TV show. Although the Suffites held significant sway, they were backed, or sometimes opposed, by a council of elders known as the 104. Picture a group of savvy merchants and seasoned military leaders who could make or break a Suffite's career faster than you can say, phonician. This council was the real power behind the throne, ensuring that the city's commercial interests were always front and center. Forget about democracy. This was governance through a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and backdoor deals. And oh, those deals. Carthaginian trade agreements were as intricate as a Netflix subscription plan, complete with surprise clauses and the occasional price hike. These weren't your run-of-the-mill treaties. They were master classes in economic diplomacy, carefully crafted to secure Carthage's grip on Mediterranean commerce. Take the infamous Treaty of Ebro in 226 BCE, which delineated spheres of influence with Rome. On paper, it looked like a peaceful accord, but underneath, it was a chess move designed to check Roman expansion. Talk about playing the long game. Now, let's put Carthage side by side with its less-than-glamorous rival, Rome. If Carthage was the suave, sophisticated merchant kingdom, Rome was the upstart farm boy with dreams of grandeur. But Carthage's governance was a polished, albeit ruthless, oligarchy. Rome's political arena was a chaotic mishmash of patricians and plebeians duking it out for power. The Roman Republic might have had its Senate, but it was a far cry from the well-oiled machine at Carthage. The Romans had ambition and a knack for organized chaos, but Carthage had the kind of economic savvy that could turn ambition into reality. Let's not forget the key figures who steered this ship of state. Hanno the Navigator, for instance, was a Carthaginian explorer who took commerce to uncharted territories, literally. His voyages along the African coast expanded Carthage's influence and opened new avenues for trade. Meanwhile, generals like Hamilcar Barca and his son Hannibal didn't just win battles. They were pivotal in ensuring Carthage's economic interests were protected. These weren't just military leaders. They were strategists who understood that control of trade routes was as crucial as control of the battlefield. Carthage's political intrigue wasn't just limited to its own borders. Their diplomatic outreach was like a masterful PR campaign designed to win over allies and neutralize threats. They played the game of thrones with the Greeks, Etruscans, and other Mediterranean powers, often turning rivals into partners. It was like watching a grand game of risk, with each alliance shifting the balance of power in Carthage's favor. The Carthaginians were masters at leveraging their economic might to secure political stability, a strategy that kept them at the forefront of Mediterranean politics. But let's not get too wrapped up in the romance of Carthaginian diplomacy. As with any empire, there was a darker side. Carthage didn't hesitate to use its economic and military muscle to suppress dissent and expand its influence. Their expansionist policies often meant the subjugation of local populations and the imposition of harsh trade terms. It was a dog-eat-dog world, and Carthage had no qualms about wearing the big dog collar. Yet, despite their ruthless tactics, Carthage's political and economic systems were undeniably effective. They created a network of trade and influence that spanned the Mediterranean, ensuring the city's prosperity for centuries. Carthage wasn't just a city. It was a phenomenon that reshaped the ancient world, proving that in the game of empires, brains often trumped brawn. As we wrap up this political tour de force, remember that Carthage's legacy isn't just about the deals they made or the battles they fought. It's about the complex web of power, commerce, and diplomacy that made them a force to be reckoned with. And as we continue to explore their history, one thing is clear. Carthage wasn't just playing the game. They were rewriting the rules, one trade agreement at a time. Now, if you thought Carthage's political maneuvering was impressive, wait until you hear about their military prowess. You see, behind every successful ancient trade empire was a formidable military machine, and Carthage was no exception. Forget the myth of the peaceful Phoenician traders. These guys had a navy that could make Poseidon himself sit up and take notice. Let's dive into the legend of the Carthaginian navy, the original practitioners of shark and oar. At the height of its power, Carthage's navy was the largest and most advanced in the Mediterranean. We're talking about a fleet of over 200 warships, each one a marvel of ancient engineering. The backbone of this maritime juggernaut was the quinquereme, a type of warship that was the ancient equivalent of a battleship. With 5 rows of oars and a battering ram at the prow, these ships were designed for one thing: dominance at sea. But don't be fooled into thinking these ships were just about brute force. The Carthaginians were strategic geniuses who understood that the true power of their navy lay in its ability to secure trade routes. Their ships weren't just instruments of war. They were the guardians of commerce. By controlling the sea lanes, Carthage could ensure that its merchant fleets could sail unmolested, bringing wealth and prosperity back to the city. This is where the myth-busting comes in. The popular image of Carthaginian ships as fearsome instruments of destruction overlooks their real purpose: economic security. Sure, they could smash through enemy lines like a hot knife through butter, but more often than not, they were there to ensure that Carthage's lucrative trade continued without a hitch. In fact, Carthage's naval prowess was as much about deterrence as it was about actual combat. The mere sight of their fleet on the horizon was enough to send many a would-be pirate or rival city-state scurrying back to port. Now, while the navy was the jewel in Carthage's military crown, their land forces were nothing to sneeze at either. Enter Hannibal Barca, the general who gave the Romans nightmares and elephants an unexpected Mediterranean cruise. Hannibal's daring march over the Alps with a herd of elephants is legendary, but let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. This was less about dramatic flair and more about strategic genius. Hannibal's campaign in Italy wasn't just a military maneuver. It was a calculated move to disrupt Rome's economic stability. By taking the fight to Roman soil, Hannibal aimed to cut off their trade routes and weaken their economic power. It was a strategy that almost paid off, as Hannibal won several major battles and kept Rome on high alert for years. But in the end, even his brilliance couldn't overcome the logistical nightmare of sustaining an army deep in enemy territory without a steady supply line. Speaking of supply lines, it's important to remember that Carthage's military might was intricately linked to its economy. Their soldiers were often mercenaries, drawn from across the Mediterranean and paid handsomely for their services. This reliance on hired muscle was both a strength and a weakness. On the one hand, it allowed Carthage to field a diverse and flexible fighting force. On the other, it made them dependent on a steady flow of cash to keep their armies intact. This brings us back to the heart of Carthaginian military strategy: securing trade routes. Without control of the seas and protection of their economic interests, Carthage's entire empire could unravel. Their military wasn't about conquest for conquest's sake. It was about ensuring that the lifeblood of their economy kept flowing. This is the harsh reality behind the romantic tales of Hannibal's elephants and naval triumphs. In the end, It was all about the money. But don't let this pragmatic view fool you into thinking that Carthage's military was any less impressive. Their ability to project power across the Mediterranean was unparalleled, and their influence was felt from the shores of Spain to the sands of North Africa. The Carthaginians were masters at using their military might to back up their economic interests, a lesson that echoes through history to this day. As we continue to unravel the complex tapestry of Carthaginian history, one thing is clear. Their legacy isn't just about ships and soldiers. It's about the delicate balance of power and commerce, the interplay of military strength and economic savvy that made them a force to be reckoned with. Carthage wasn't just an empire. It was a masterclass in the art of survival, proving that in the ancient world, the pen and the sword were mightier together. So, as we leave Carthage's mighty navy and land forces for now, remember that their story is far from over. There's still more to explore, more myths to debunk, and more lessons to learn from this extraordinary civilization. As the sails of Carthage's mighty navy fade into the horizon, it's time to chart a course into the tumultuous waters of their decline. You see, every empire has its Achilles heel, and for Carthage, it was a lethal cocktail of overextension and an increasingly relentless foe. Rome, this is the great cautionary tale in the annals of history. A city that rose like a phoenix only to be consumed in the flames of its own ambition. Let's rewind to the start of the Punic Wars, a trilogy more epic than any Hollywood blockbuster. The First Punic War kicked off in 264 BCE over Sicily, a gem in the Mediterranean crown that both Carthage and Rome coveted. Now, if you're picturing a polite disagreement over who gets the last piece of pizza, think again. This was a brutal brawl that lasted 23 years, with Rome and Carthage locked in a deadly embrace, like two heavyweight boxers refusing to throw in the towel. The war drained resources faster than a leaky ship, costing Carthage dearly both in manpower and treasure. By its end, in 241 BCE, Carthage's treasury was emptier than a desert oasis, and they had to fork over Sicily to Rome. A bitter pill to swallow indeed. But the Carthaginians weren't about to take this lying down. Enter Hannibal Barca, the military prodigy with a vendetta against Rome, so intense it might as well have been carved in stone. The Second Punic War, 218-201 BCE, was Hannibal's playground, and he made sure Rome got more than a taste of its own medicine. He's the guy who took an army, including war elephants, over the Alps, redefining the term road trip in the process. His bold tactics and strategic brilliance brought Rome to its knees, winning battles like Cannae in 216 BCE, where he annihilated a Roman force twice the size of his own. But here's where the myth meets reality. Despite his tactical genius, Hannibal couldn't deliver the knockout punch. Rome, with its seemingly infinite reserves of manpower and resources, adapted and regrouped. The tide turned with the rise of Publius Cornelius Scipio, known as Scipio Africanus, who took the fight to Carthage's doorstep by attacking their holdings in Spain and eventually Africa. The decisive Battle of Zama in 202 BCE sealed Carthage's fate, as Scipio outmaneuvered Hannibal with a blend of cunning and sheer force. Carthage was forced to capitulate, losing its territories and its ability to wage war without Roman consent. In essence, they were boxed into a corner, a former titan shackled and diminished. Now, if you think Carthage had learned its lesson, think again. The Third Punic War, 149-146 BCE, was less a war and more a tragic coda. Rome, ever the opportunistic aggressor, found a pretext to finish what they'd started. The siege of Carthage was a brutal affair, lasting 3 years, and culminating in the city's complete destruction in 146 BCE. It was Rome's way of saying, "Don't mess with us again," a stark reminder of the zero-sum game of ancient geopolitics. But before you start penning Carthage's obituary, consider this. Their influence didn't vanish with the city. Carthage's legacy in Mediterranean trade was more resilient than a cockroach in a nuclear fallout. Their innovative trade practices and economic models left an indelible mark on the ancient world. The Romans, those copycats par excellence, adopted many Carthaginian techniques, from shipbuilding to commerce. Even in defeat, Carthage had set precedents that would influence empires for centuries to come. Carthage also bequeathed us a lesson in economics and empire building. Know your limits. Their overextension, chasing after every opportunity without securing a solid base, proved to be their undoing. It's the age-old tale of biting off more than you can chew, a narrative as relevant in today's boardrooms as it was on ancient battlefields. The Carthaginian story is a testament to the perils of unchecked ambition, a reminder that even the most brilliant strategies can crumble if stretched too thin. And so, in the grand ledger of history, Carthage remains a symbol of both triumph and tragedy. Their rise and fall echo the cyclical nature of empires, how they surge, stumble, and sometimes spectacularly implode. Yet their story isn't just a cautionary tale. It's also a celebration of human ingenuity and resilience. Carthage may have been conquered, but their spirit of innovation and trade prowess endured, influencing the very empire that sought to erase them. As we wrap up this odyssey through Carthaginian history, remember that their legacy is more than ruins and relics. It's a story of ambition, audacity, and the enduring impact of human endeavor. Carthage may have fallen, but in the echoes of their past, we find lessons that resonate across the ages, a reminder that even in defeat, there can be victory. And so, as we sail away from the shores of ancient Carthage, let's carry their story with us, a beacon of what was and what might be again. In the grand theatre of history, the Abbasid Caliphate's rise was nothing short of a plot twist that would make even the most seasoned screenwriters sit up and take notes. We're talking about a time when empires were as fashionable as TikTok trends, and the Umayyads were the reigning influencers of the Islamic world. But as every fan of the underdog story knows, where there's a king, there's usually a revolution brewing just out of sight. Now, the Umayyads weren't exactly the poster children for stability. By the time 750 CE rolled around, their dynasty was like an overinflated balloon, ready to pop at the slightest prick. The Umayyads had been in power since 661 CE, ruling from Damascus with a mix of Arabic flair and, let's be honest, a good dose of nepotism. At the height of their power, they controlled a sprawling empire that stretched from the Iberian Peninsula in the west to the Indus River in the east. But with great power comes great responsibility, or, in their case, great arrogance. Their rule was marked by a blend of military might and political manipulation, but also by hefty doses of dissatisfaction among the diverse populations under their control. The Umayyads loved a bit of bling and weren't shy about flaunting their wealth, often at the expense of non-Arab Muslims, who felt like they'd been handed the short straw at the political raffle. Enter Abu Muslim, a figure as enigmatic as he was pivotal. He was the kind of revolutionary who could charm a room full of skeptics right before flipping the whole place upside down. Abu Muslim hailed from Khorasan, a region that today straddles parts of Iran, Turkmenistan, and Afghanistan, a melting pot of cultures and a hotbed for revolutionary ideas. He wasn't a big fan of the Umayyads' exclusivity club and saw the potential for something new, something that promised a more egalitarian society. So what did he do? He started a movement, of course. Abu Muslim had a knack for rallying people, a talent that would soon turn the tide of history. The political chaos of 750 CE was akin to a reality show reunion special, full of drama, unexpected alliances, and a fair share of betrayal. Abu Muslim was a master of strategy, and he knew that the key to toppling the Umayyads lay in uniting the disgruntled masses. His efforts culminated in the Battle of the Zab, a conflict that should be remembered not just for its bloody climax, but for what it represented, a seismic shift in Islamic governance. The battle took place near the Zab River, and while numbers can sometimes lie, in this case, they told a pretty clear story. The Abbasid army, bolstered by Persian converts and other disgruntled groups, outnumbered the Umayyads, and they had a strategic edge that the latter didn't see coming. Here's where romanticized narratives often jump in, painting the battle as a glorious clash of titans. But let's peel back the layers. The Battle of the Zab wasn't just a heroic showdown. It was a calculated dismantling of a regime that had overstayed its welcome. The Abbasids didn't just march into battle with swords and shields. They had the backing of clever diplomacy and an army motivated by promises of inclusion and reform. In fact, some estimates suggest the Abbasid forces numbered around 100,000 strong, effectively dwarfing the Umayyads, who were scrambling to maintain their grip. The battle was as much about numbers as it was about strategy, and the Abbasids played their cards right. But let's not get swept away by the romance of revolution. The harsh reality was that this was a bloody affair. The Umayyad Caliph, Marwan Roman II, fled the battlefield, leading to a chase that ended with his untimely demise in Egypt. And just like that, the curtain fell on the Umayyad dynasty, leaving behind a legacy of both grandeur and greed. The Abbasids, under the leadership of the first Caliph, Abu al-Abbas al-Safar, took over, and while they promised change, they also inherited a complex web of social, economic, and political challenges. Abu al-Abbas, known as the Bloodshedder, wasn't exactly the cuddliest of leaders, but he had a vision of an Islamic empire that was more inclusive and less discriminatory. Of course, reality was a bit more complicated. While the Abbasid revolution was indeed a step towards more inclusivity, it was also a reminder that power, once seized, can be just as intoxicating as it was for their predecessors. The fall of the Umayyads and the rise of the Abbasids marked the beginning of a new chapter in Islamic history, one that promised a golden age of culture, science, and commerce. But before we get to the glittering jewels of the Abbasid Caliphate, it's crucial to understand the gritty, blood-stained roots from which it grew. The transition was not just a simple handover of power. It was a tectonic shift that challenged the very foundations of Islamic governance and paved the way for centuries of both innovation and intrigue. History, as we know, is written by the victors, and the Abbasids were no different. They crafted a narrative of legitimacy and promised a new era of justice and prosperity. Let's not forget that every golden age has its shadows, and every revolution its costs. The Abbasids might have toppled a dynasty, but in doing so, they also set the stage for new conflicts and challenges that would test their mettle in the years to come. So, as we delve deeper into this tale, remember that behind every glorious epoch lies a story of struggle, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of power. And so, with a blood-soaked crown and a collective sigh of relief, the Abbasids stepped into the spotlight, ready to pen their own saga in the annals of history. But here's the kicker. They had visions of grandeur that would make even the most ambitious of real estate developers green with envy. Their first order of business, moving the capital from Damascus to Baghdad. If you're wondering why, let's just say it wasn't because they preferred the Tigris over the Barada for fishing weekends. The decision to plant their flag in Baghdad wasn't some whimsical choice. It was a strategic masterstroke. Geographically, Baghdad was the equivalent of a prime beachfront property, minus the beach. Nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, it was the perfect spot for trade, allowing goods and ideas to flow like water across continents. But let's not gloss over the fact that Baghdad, before the Abbasids got their hands on it, was a sleepy little village. Imagine trying to sell that fixer-upper. Great potential, needs a little TLC, would have been an understatement. But the Abbasids had a vision. They drew up plans that would put modern urban planners to shame. The city was laid out in a nearly perfect circle, a design so meticulous that it made a Swiss watch look sloppy. The Caliphate spared no expense, literally. The construction of Baghdad cost around 8 million dirhams. In today's terms, we're talking a figure that would make your average tech billionaire raise an eyebrow. But hey, you can't put a price on a dream, right? Now, let's talk about the economic boom that followed. Once Baghdad started to rise from the dust, like some mythical phoenix, it wasn't long before trade routes lit up like holiday lights. The city became a hub for everything from spices to silks, with caravans rolling in and out like clockwork. To give you an idea, the bazaar scene in Baghdad would make the New York Stock Exchange look like a small-town farmer's market. At its height, the city's population was estimated to be around 1 million, an impressive feat for the 8th century, considering that most other cities were still figuring out indoor plumbing. But trade wasn't the only game in town. The Abbasids were all about the intellectual gold rush. Enter the House of Wisdom, Baghdad's answer to Hogwarts, minus the wand-waving. Instead of wizards, it housed scholars, scientists, and philosophers, all furiously scribbling away in a quest for knowledge. Think of it as a medieval think tank where translating ancient texts was as thrilling as any magical duel. Funded by the caliphs, this institution embodied the intellectual fervor of the era, drawing talent from across the empire like moths to a flame. The House of Wisdom represented the Abbasids' commitment to knowledge as power, but let's not romanticize it too much. Sure, they were crazy about Aristotle and Pythagoras, but they also knew that a strong intellectual base was key to maintaining control. Call it enlightened self-interest, if you will. The scholars at the House of Wisdom weren't just bookworms. They were the Empire's secret weapons, decoding the mysteries of the universe to help the Caliphate maintain its edge. The Abbasids' investment in knowledge paid dividends, leading to breakthroughs in fields as varied as astronomy, medicine, and mathematics. Algebra, anyone. That little gem owes its roots to this period. And while we're at it, let's thank them for the coffee, too. You heard that right. Our morning cup of sanity has Abbasid innovators to thank. Yet, it wasn't all academic pursuits and trade wins. The Abbasids had their fair share of political juggling to do. The sheer diversity of their empire meant that keeping the peace was like playing a never-ending game of chess, with pieces that had minds of their own. They had to navigate a complex web of alliances and rivalries, balancing the interests of Arabs, Persians, Turks, and countless other groups. It was a high-stakes political melodrama, with a new plot twist every season. In their quest to maintain control, Abbasids also had to deal with the occasional rebellion, because nothing says, "We love our rulers," like a good old-fashioned uprising. But they were savvy enough to keep most of these under control, using a mix of diplomacy and the occasional show of force. It was a delicate dance, one that required more than just power. It required the wisdom that the Abbasids so cherished. As we delve deeper into the Abbasids' glittering epoch, let's not forget the shadows that lurked at its edges. The Caliphate's gleaming achievements were often built on pragmatic, sometimes ruthless decisions. They were visionaries, yes, but also realists who understood the harsh realities of empire building. The transformation of Baghdad from a dusty village to a bustling metropolis was a testament to the Abbasids' ambition and ingenuity. But it was also a reminder that every act of creation leaves behind its own set of challenges. The story of Baghdad and the Abbasids is one of contrasts, a tale of shimmering brilliance and gritty pragmatism. It was a time when the world seemed full of possibilities, where the boundaries of knowledge and power were being pushed to their limits. Yet, as with all golden ages, the Abbasids' era was also marked by the inevitable tension between aspiration and reality, between the dreams they wove and the world they inhabited. So, as we continue to explore this fascinating chapter of history, remember that the Abbasids' legacy is as complex and multifaceted as the city they built. The Abbasids' era was nothing if not a kaleidoscope of intellectual fervor and cultural innovation, drawing a line in the sand between the old world and the brave new one they aimed to construct. Picture Baghdad, not just as a city, but as the beating heart of an empire, pulsing with ideas and intrigue. It wasn't all about sand and desert camels. This was the Silicon Valley of its time, minus the overpriced avocado toast. The Abbasid Caliphate, with its visionary zeal, became the torchbearer for a new age of enlightenment, showcasing a technological and cultural renaissance that would make the makers of Renaissance Florence look like they were doodling in the margins. Now, when we talk about scientific advancements, we can't just gloss over the fact that the Abbasids were the real-life amalgamation of Einstein's brain with Da Vinci's curiosity. They weren't just tinkering in the sandbox, they were rewriting the rulebook. Let's start with mathematics, a field where the Abbasids not only played the game, but practically invented the rulebook. Enter Al-Khwarizmi, the mathematical maestro who was punching out equations before it was cool. Al-Khwarizmi was the guy who took math from being a bunch of numbers to the elegant dance of algebra. Yes, algebra, the bane of high school students everywhere, owes its origins to this era. Al-Khwarizmi's work on al-Jabr, the Arabic word for reunion of broken parts, laid the groundwork for modern mathematics. Without him, we might still be trying to figure out what X stands for, and calculus would probably be a myth whispered about in dark alleys. But the Abbasid contribution to science didn't stop at math. Oh no, they were just getting started. Imagine looking up at the night sky, with stars twinkling like cosmic paparazzi, and wondering what it all meant. The Abbasid scholars did just that, and took astronomy to new heights, literally. They built observatories like the one in Baghdad, where visionaries like al-Battani refined the solar year and calculated the Earth's tilt. If you've ever marveled at a lunar eclipse or used a calendar, tip your hat to these guys. They were mapping the heavens while the rest of the world was still trying to figure out if the Earth was flat or just having a bad hair day. And then there's medicine. The Abbasids were the original ER, minus the drama and George Clooney. Hospitals in Baghdad became the equivalent of health care hubs, offering free treatment to all, regardless of status, a radical concept even by today's standards. Al-Razi, a towering figure in medicine, was slaying diseases like smallpox with the precision of a medieval doctor. House. He didn't just treat patients, he wrote encyclopedias about them, laying the foundation for clinical medicine. His comprehensive book of medicine was the go-to manual for centuries, like the Gray's Anatomy of its time, but with more practical applications and fewer plot twists. But let's not get carried away by this golden glow. There's a myth that the Abbasid era was an enlightened utopia where everyone held hands and sang Cumbaya in perfect harmony. In reality, it was more like a Game of Thrones episode, with social hierarchies and political machinations lurking in every shadow. Sure, the Abbasids were patrons of the arts and sciences, but they were also political jugglers, constantly balancing on the tightrope of power. The caliphs ruled over a diverse empire, and keeping the peace was a full-time job that required both charm and an iron fist. Take the social stratification, for example. While the Abbasids were more inclusive than their predecessors, the society wasn't exactly a meritocracy. Arabs still held the top slots, with Persians, Turks, and others playing supporting roles. It was like a medieval casting call, where only certain actors got the leading roles, while the rest were relegated to the chorus. Non-Muslims, meanwhile, were tolerated but subject to a jizya tax, kind of medieval membership fee for not being part of the club. This wasn't a world where everyone was equal. It was one where the pecking order was alive and well, and the pecking could get pretty intense. Behind the curtain of cultural achievements and scholarly pursuits, political intrigues simmered like a pot about to boil over. The caliphs were constantly watching their backs, wary of coups and conspiracies. They were like chess players, always 3 moves ahead, or at least trying to be. The infamous Barmakid family, who served as viziers, learned this the hard way. They were the power behind the throne, until one day they weren't. In a dramatic turn of events worthy of a cliffhanger, Caliph Harun al-Rashid decided they'd outlived their usefulness. The Barmakids fell from grace faster than a viral TikTok star, and their downfall was a reminder that the path to power was as treacherous as it was alluring. Yet, despite the political machinations and social hierarchies, the Abbasid Golden Age left an indelible mark on human history. It was a time when scholars weren't just encouraged to think outside the box, they were encouraged to reinvent the box entirely. The Abbasid era was a crucible of creativity, where the exchange of ideas was as vigorous as any modern-day debate on Twitter, just with fewer trolls. They took the best of the ancient world, from Greek philosophy to Indian mathematics, and synthesized it into something new, something that would echo through the ages. As we continue to unravel the Abbasid saga, keep in mind that this was a world of contradictions, a dazzling display of human achievement shadowed by the realities of power and politics. The Abbasids constructed an empire on the foundation of knowledge, but they also understood that knowledge alone wasn't enough to hold it all together. They were dreamers and realists, builders and schemers, and their legacy is as complex as the equations they solved. So, as we turn the page to explore more of this remarkable epoch, remember that every golden age has its tarnished edges, and every story its darker chapters. As the Abbasid Golden Age glimmered with genius and grandeur, beneath the surface, cracks were quietly forming. Think of it like a magnificent tapestry, slowly fraying at the edges, still beautiful to the casual observer, but a keen eye would notice the unraveling threads. The truth is, even the most splendid of empires can wobble on its pedestal. Internally, the Abbasid Caliphate was contending with its own version of a corporate restructuring nightmare. The empire had expanded to such a degree that managing it was like trying to juggle flaming swords, exciting but inevitably painful. The vastness of their territory, which at its height stretched from modern-day Tunisia to the western fringes of India, made centralized control a logistical quagmire. Imagine trying to issue a memo across time zones before email, a bit of a headache, to say the least. The caliphs had to delegate, and delegate they did, albeit with mixed results, into the rise of regional governors, or as they were known, emirs. These guys weren't just middle managers. They were mini-monarchs in their own right, and they wielded power with a flair reminiscent of a C-suite executive who just discovered a loophole in their contract. The emirs were supposed to be loyal to the caliph, but loyalty has a funny way of evaporating when ambition comes knocking. By the 9th century, the Abbasids were facing an empire that resembled a patchwork quilt, with each emir ruling their fiefdom as a semi-independent entity. They were like cats, nominally part of the household, but with a mind of their own. This decentralization meant that while the caliph in Baghdad was the nominal leader, real power was increasingly localized. The loyalty of these regional powers was as dependable as a New Year's resolution, and the caliph's ability to enforce their will was eroding faster than a sandcastle at high tide. Meanwhile, externally, the Abbasids were dealing with pressures that made a high-stakes poker game look like a friendly round of Go Fish. The Byzantine Empire, their old frenemies, never missed an opportunity to test the Caliphate's mettle. And then there were the Fatimids, who rose in North Africa with a clear intent to challenge Abbasid supremacy. By the 10th century, the Fatimids had established a rival caliphate in Egypt, effectively giving the Abbasids a run for their money, quite literally. Speaking of money, here's where the economic realities come into play. The Abbasid economy, once a roaring engine of prosperity, began to sputter as resources were stretched thin. Military campaigns, whether defensive or expansionary, cost a pretty dirham. And when you're fighting battles on multiple fronts against the Byzantines, rebellious emirs, and the Fatimids, your war chest tends to empty faster than a keg at a college party. Inflation became a persistent thorn in the Abbasid side, and maintaining the grandeur of Baghdad required funds that were increasingly hard to come by. Now, sprinkle in a dash of social unrest, and you've got a recipe for decline. The peasantry, taxed to the hilt, began to grumble, and the merchant class, once the backbone of the Abbasid economy, found itself squeezed by the demands of a government desperate for coin. It was like the empire had become a house of cards, built on a shaky foundation of economic strain and political fragmentation. By the time the Seljuk Turks came onto the scene in the 11th century, the Abbasids were like an aging rock band still trying to headline the festival circuit. The Seljuks, with their formidable military prowess, initially arrived as mercenaries, but soon became the power behind the throne. In 1055, they took Baghdad, and the caliph found himself reduced to a figurehead, a puppet with ceremonial strings. The Seljuks played the political game like seasoned pros, but their rise marked a further dilution of Abbasid authority. And just when you thought the plot couldn't get any thicker, the Mongols decided to crash the party. The Mongol invasion of 1258 was not the sudden apocalypse some might imagine, but rather the culmination of a long series of ignored warning signs. The Abbasids, by then a shadow of their former glory, were ill-prepared to face the whirlwind that was the Mongol horde. Led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, the Mongols brought with them an army that was the medieval equivalent of a steamroller. The numbers are staggering. Hulagu's force reportedly numbered around 120,000, a blend of cavalry and infantry that moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. In contrast, the Abbasid military was a patchwork quilt of local levies and mercenaries, struggling to muster a defense that could repel such a disciplined and ruthless force. When the Mongols laid siege to Baghdad, it was less a battle and more a foregone conclusion. The city that once stood as a beacon of learning and culture fell in a matter of weeks, its libraries and treasures pillaged in a devastating blow to human history. The fall of Baghdad in 1258 was a tragedy of monumental proportions, but it was also a wake-up call, a reminder that empires are not eternal, and even the mightiest can fall. The Abbasids, once the torchbearers of a golden age, became a cautionary tale of ambition unchecked by foresight. Their downfall was not merely the result of Mongol ferocity, but a lesson in the perils of complacency and the relentless march of time. As we leave this chapter of the Abbasid saga open, pondering the echoes of their achievements and the shadows of their decline, remember that history, much like life, is complex. It's filled with triumphs and tragedies, glittering peaks and shadowy valleys. The Abbasid story is not just one of rise and fall, but a testament to the enduring dance of power and the ever-turning wheel of history. So stay tuned, because the tale of the Abbasids is far from over, and the lessons of their legacy continue to resonate through the corridors of time. And so, as the Abbasid Caliphate's star dimmed, its brilliance didn't just evaporate into the historical ether. Nope, it laid down roots that would sprout through the centuries, influencing everything from your morning coffee ritual to the algebra homework you're still dodging. The Abbasids, with their intellectual and cultural fireworks, left a mark that's more indelible than your last ill-advised tattoo. Let's start with the obvious, knowledge. The Abbasids weren't just hoarding scrolls like some medieval book club gone wild. They were translating Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic, and in the process, saving them from the black hole of history. Their efforts in the House of Wisdom were akin to a cultural recycling program. Take the old, add some Abbasid flair, and churn out something that would eventually ignite the European Renaissance. Without them, guys like Aristotle and Hippocrates might have been relegated to the dusty back shelves of history, like that obscure indie album you swear you discovered first. And speaking of discoveries, remember algebra. You can thank Al-K.H. Khwarizmi for turning math into the labyrinthine puzzle we know and tolerate today. His works were foundational, not only for the mathletes among us, but also for the navigation techniques that would later help explorers like Columbus not get hilariously lost at sea. The Abbasids' contributions to mathematics were like the Wi-Fi of their time, connecting disparate ideas and people in ways that fundamentally changed how we interact with the world. Don't forget the world of medicine, where the Abbasids were basically the original health influencers. Al-Razi and his peers laid down the foundations of clinical medicine, writing texts that would become the 13th century equivalent of bestsellers, translated into Latin and circulated throughout Europe. They were diagnosing and treating diseases with a methodical approach that was centuries ahead of its time, turning the art of medicine into a science that was less about guesswork and more about rigorous observation. So next time you're grumbling about a checkup, tip your hat to these medical pioneers. Let's not overlook their contributions to astronomy. Abbasid scholars were mapping the stars with a precision that would make NASA blush. They refined the astrolabe, an instrument that was basically the GPS of the medieval world, allowing sailors to navigate the high seas with more confidence than a millennial with Google Maps. Their celestial charts and calculations eventually made their way to Europe, influencing astronomers who would later plot out the solar system and beyond. Of course, we can't talk about lasting impacts without mentioning Baghdad itself. The city was the epitome of urban planning, a bustling metropolis that was the envy of the medieval world. Its circular design wasn't just for show. It was a testament to the Abbasids' vision of a cosmopolitan hub where trade, culture, and ideas could flow unimpeded. Even today, the concept of a city as a melting pot of diversity and innovation owes a nod to the Abbasid blueprint. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The romantic notion of a unified, enlightened Abbasid utopia is a bit of a stretch. Sure, they were trailblazers, but they were also juggling a political circus. The empire's decline was partly due to the very complexities that made it great, a sprawling geography and diverse populace that were as difficult to manage as a herd of caffeinated cats. Their administration was a masterclass in political brinkmanship, balancing power with persuasion, and sometimes resorting to, let's say, less than gentle methods to maintain order. The Abbasids' legacy isn't just a tale of scientific triumphs and cultural fluorescence. It's a reminder of the cyclical nature of history. Empires rise, and they fall, often under the weight of their own success. The Abbasids soared to great heights because they dared to dream bigger, but they stumbled because their ambitions outpaced their ability to adapt to a rapidly changing world. It's a narrative as old as time. Aspire, achieve, overreach, repeat. Fast forward to today, and you'll find echoes of the Abbasids in everything from the coffee sitting on your desk, a nod to the beans first brewed in the Islamic world, to the algorithms that power your smartphone. Their intellectual curiosity laid the groundwork for a global exchange of ideas that still fuels innovation. It's a legacy that's as sprawling and multifaceted as the empire itself, one that continues to remind us of the power of knowledge and the perils of unchecked ambition. So, as we close the book on the Abbasid saga, remember that their story is a tapestry of brilliance and complexity, a historical epic that teaches us about the heights of human achievement and the inevitable shadows that accompany them. The Abbasids were dreamers and doers, visionaries and realists, whose legacy is as rich and varied as the Caliphate they built. And as the wheel of history continues to turn, their tale remains a testament to the enduring dance of innovation and power, a reminder that the past is never truly past, but a prologue to the world we continue to shape.